Okay, welcome to today's meeting of the Health and Social Care Select Committee at the London Borough of Hillingdon. This meeting is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. The purpose of this committee is to monitor services provided by health partners and adult social care and review their performance. We also undertake in-depth reviews and witness sessions on specific topics and submit our findings to the decision-making cabinet. My name is Councillor Nick Denys and I am the chairman of this committee. Before we start, I have some important housekeeping for everyone present. Please ensure that your mobile phones are on silent. I don't know if I've done mine, so I'll do mine right now, otherwise that'll be extremely embarrassing. Okay, that's good. Right. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm does go off, please follow Nikki wherever she goes to. Please keep your microphone muted when you aren't speaking and then put it on to speak. Ultimately, this is for those who are watching on YouTube, because obviously I know we can all hear each other in the room, but the mics help with that. And as chairman, I will call on people to speak, so please indicate to me if you'd like to speak, and that would be great. So now we'll move on to the agenda. Nikki, do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. We've had apologies from Councillor Chapman, and Councillor Ahmad Wallan is here as his substitute.
Welcome, Shrey. You're always welcome to join us in the committee, so thank you for coming along. Does anybody have any declaration of interest in matters before this meeting? No? Fantastic. We have the minutes from the meeting on the 26th of January 2023. Are we happy with them, or does anybody have any suggestions for edits? Great. We're all great. So they're all agreed. Fantastic. Thank you. Item 4. Everything in this meeting is going to be in public, isn't it? Correct. Yes. Fantastic. So that whizzes through to our first main agenda item, which is item 5, and this is our first public witness session on the CAMHS referral pathway. So this is an in-depth project we're doing into how CAMHS and other related children's mental health services are doing, and the purpose of our review essentially is to assess what's happening and see if there's any recommendations we can make to try and help improve what's happening. So this is our first public witness session. We have had some meetings with families who've been involved in the system, so we have had some private witness sessions already, which have been very useful, but this is our first one. So we have a fantastic cast of really informed and interesting people in front of us who can help open our eyes to how it all works. So what I'm going to do, I suppose I'll introduce everybody first of all, because that makes sense. We have Kelly O'Neill, who's Interim Director of Public Health here at the London Borough of Hillingdon. Alex Coman, who's Director of Safeguarding Partnership and Quality Assurance here at the London Borough of Hillingdon. We have Jane Hainstock, who's Head of Joint Commissioning with North West London ICB. And we have Tina Swain, who's Service Director of the CAMHS and Eating Disorders. And we also, through CAMHS, we have Dr. Azhar Mohammed. Actually, no. Oh, fair enough, that's okay. And Dr. Paul Hooper, who I can definitely see. That's fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, I've sent everybody an order of who I think should speak, and we'll go through that order. What I suggest to committee members is after each individual has spoken, then we can open it up to questions on whatever that topic that individual has spoken on, and ultimately once we get to the end, if there's more questions, we can have more questions, I think. Okay, fantastic. So and also, Kelly, obviously, you're welcome to chip in at any point as well if you have any questions, because you're here just to sort of observe and to maybe chip in if necessary. Yes, fantastic. Okay, excellent. So let's start off with Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I was asked to talk to you this evening about what services the Council provides to the children and parents who are affected by mental health issues, and just to try to keep this structure and hopefully brief. I'll talk about various areas of intervention, starting with early intervention and early prevention, and then moving towards the statutory intervention and statutory services, and then speaking briefly about the children who are in our care, so our looked after children. Just to provide some examples of some of the work we're doing at the early intervention and prevention stage. I will refer to targeted adolescent development services. who are developing delivering face-to-face counselling sessions for young people in 3 locations in the borough, and at the moment scoping a 4th one in the north of the borough. These sessions, are, as I said, are delivered face-to-face, but there are also sessions online that are available for young people who are preferring to access them that way. They also deliver sessions on Friday evenings and sessions on Sunday mornings as well, Saturday mornings, I should say, Saturday mornings as well. And also they work very closely with the pupil support team who are supporting children who cannot attend education provision, because there is a very clear evidence there's clear evidence to suggest that children not attending school or not being part of the education system or not being able to attend school impact negatively on their emotional well-being. At the same time, the team has worked closely with Hillingdon Mind and developed a group therapy provision, which is used as a step-down service from the face-to-face and one-to-one counselling that is being done through the family hubs. So speaking about the service, during 2022, so for the duration of the last year, they received in the region of 380 referrals. They've triaged all these referrals within 7 days of being received, and all the people who have had referrals had an assessment over the phone in the first 28 days. And then obviously a number had individual counselling. Now the engagement and the contact has taken place with 350 children. So considering 382 referrals, 354 children have been in contact with. That is a very, I think that's a really good indicator of good work and good performance. Also, I would just highlight the fact that during 2022, the service will deliver over 1,500 counselling sessions to various children in various formats. And starting this year, the service has a current capacity of delivering around 100 sessions a week, or a delivering session for 100 children a week. So that's where we are. And going forward, there is a very, I think it's quite an exciting development. I think, Chair, you're probably going to be pushing that from some other forums that you're chairing. Is that they're looking at providing counselling to young people in their own native language. So we started by commissioning some counsellors who are speaking Arabic, Farsi, and Pashto, and we're looking at recruiting for some other languages as well. And this is specifically targeted to children who are seeking asylum in this country, so children who are looked after, and the English is not their first language. So I think that's quite a good development, and looking forward to see how that works. And also, starting this month, we're piloting a yoga for wellness session with 6 young people. We'll see how that works, and if that is positive, then we'll be looking at doing some more of that. And at the same time, in early intervention, early identification, and supporting our colleagues out there who are working with children, our school inclusion colleagues, alongside working with partners in the Safeguarding Children Partnership, have developed a guide that supports school staff to address children persistent disrupting behaviour. So that is looking at various behaviours the teachers are seeing in schools, for instance, and try to help them understand where they might coming from, what's underneath them, what might be an underlying cause, and also providing some guidance on what to do about those behaviours. So again, this is all in line with kind of that early intervention, making sure that the needs are identified early and are addressed by the relevant service at the best possible time. So moving from the statutory intervention to non-statutory intervention to the statutory intervention. So this is those children or families who require a social work intervention. Just to give some context, just to say that every year the Children's Services receive in the region about 20,000 contacts from members of public or professionals around about children. Out of those 20,000 contacts, about probably 30% of them end up having a statutory assessment. Now, looking at the outcomes of the assessment and looking at the needs identifying assessment, mental health has always been kind of one of the top 3 that we see quite often, and it's either mental health of the children or mental health of the parents. And the assessments that are done in a statutory arena are always led by a social worker who is trained to understand, to spot signs of, and to understand the importance of mental health, and also who are able to link that family to the relevant service, to the relevant provision, or to use some more specialist tools to identify any sort of needs and any support that's required. And the mental health, I mean, and of course, if any child requires kind of emergency mental health support, then, you know, ambulance will be called, child will end up in A&E, they'll have mental health assessment, and then all the mental health pathway is going to be followed. But I think what's important to mention is when that happens, there's always going to be a multi-agency discharge meeting to make sure that when the child is discharged from hospital, they have the right support when they return back in the family or into their placement, or or where they go. Mental health and emotional well-being, it's always part of the children's plans, being those child in need plan, child protection, looked after plan, whatever plans they are. That is always considered. And some other examples to mention. For instance, one of our teams are engaging with a program that's called Your Choice. Now, Your Choice is being provided, is being funded across London for various boroughs to deliver, and Hillingdon at the moment is being recognised by quite a lot of people are being at the forefront of that delivery of Your Choice in London. So, what Your Choice is, it's a program that enables the social workers to utilise cognitive behaviour therapy methodology in engaging with the families. And that includes the interviews, that includes the engagement, that includes online, face-to-face, so all the type of engagement. And it's quite intensive because, you know, it involves at least one contact a week with that child, with that family. And the social worker benefits from a one-to-one and group clinical supervision that's delivered by a clinical psychologist. And that's being very positive in formulating the plans and kind of formulating the hypothesis in working with the families, but at the same time also very, 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 very helpful for the social workers themselves to have that discussion, to have that space to reflect in that way about, you know, the work they're doing, the impact they're having. And I suppose, I mean, there's many examples, I guess, in terms of what other services we're using, what other services social workers are referring into, are engaging with the families. But I'm sure my colleagues in the room will be speaking about quite a lot of those in more details. But I would just say that, you know, from our point of view, from the social work point of view, the kind of, you know, the working with the family is very important. Early identification is key to what we're doing. So that early identification of need, early intervention, and that avoidance of escalation as far as possible is probably, you know, that is the underlining condition for good outcomes for resident satisfaction, or also for providing good value for public money. Then our looked after children, and the last point that I wanted to highlight. So just to, again, for context, at the end of the last quarter, so at the end of December, Hillingdon Council and, you know, most of us in this room were corporate parents for about 350 children. And we know that mental health affects or can affect anyone in any walk of life at any stage. But we also know from research that looked after children and adopted children are more vulnerable to be affected, and that is mainly due to their difficult early experiences. And so this is why all our children, for all our looked after children, for our children, their emotional well-being is very important. Their health assessments are very important, and every child who becomes looked after will have a health assessment as soon as they enter care, within the first 20 days. And that health assessment will always consider the emotional well-being element. It's the physical and the mental health. The assessments are done for every year for children who are older than 5, and they're done every 6 months if the child is younger than 5. So those are ongoing provisions for our children. Then the other way in which we measure the emotional well-being of our children in care is through using the strength and difficulties questionnaire. Now, it's a national recognized tool that is used across the country. So the strength and difficulties questionnaire, or the SDQ, measures the well-being of the young person on a score from 0 to 40. Now, in SDQ, the lower the score, the better. So we know that in Hillingdon at the moment, the average score of all our looked after children is 12.7, and that compares favourably with the national average of 13.7, and the statutory neighbours at about 30.6. But if we have any children who are identified as having emotional well-being needs, kind of medium or high, and that's a score of 17 or above, we automatically refer them to our in-house multi-agency psychology service, which is a service that we're commissioning, we're delivering alongside our colleagues from CNWL. So this service provides direct and indirect support to children, their foster carers, adoptive parents, social workers, and residential homes colleagues as well, to enable them to engage with young people, to understand their behaviour, and to identify the best way to support them. And at the moment, we are in discussions if this service should be actually extended to 25, because at the moment it stops when the child reaches 18. But we're thinking, well, actually, probably it needs to be delivered further. And a couple of more examples, and then I'll take questions. Another thing that we're commissioning at the moment, that we're piloting, we're testing. It's a service that's called Give Space, which looks at providing moving therapy, which is through dance to performing arts, and that is being piloted with 6 young people. So we'll see how that works, and based on the outcome, we'll consider if we're going to be using more of that or not. And then, because we recognize the importance of mental health to our young people, and that some of them will need to, or will want to approach it differently, or to address it differently, we commissioned through Reese Foundation a service that's called Ask Jan. Now, Ask Jan is available to about 60 young people, and they provide a individual sessions. They are done either face to face or online. And that has been, so far, the outcome and the feedback is very positive. And the contract comes to an end very soon this year, but we're looking at potentially recommissioning that or something similar because of the positive impact that it's having. So, I mean, I will probably stop there and take some questions, because no doubt there will be questions. And yeah.
Thanks, Alex. I've got a couple, and I'll open up to other committee members. My first one is, how do you assess performance in this service? What does success look like?
Every child who is subject to, for instance, statutory service, they are assessed by a social worker. All of them will have a type of plan, depending on the assessed need. And the plan will set up for each individual child, based on their needs, based on their situation. They'll set up some targets, they'll set up some actions, and they'll set up some outcomes. So we're measuring outcomes depending individual to that child, individual to that family. Of course, we have various KPIs. For instance, we're measuring how many days an assessment takes, how many days until the review. So we have those KPIs, but I think what's important for especially this subject, it's about those individual targets we set up for every child, and that gets assessed every time the child has a review of their plan, and then that's how we measure. And very often, even say a child has a child protection plan, when that plan comes to an end, it doesn't end to nothing. It usually it goes to a child in need plan, which is the kind of lower tier, if you like. It goes to a child in need for ongoing support. And some families require help for longer, and they will have through our stronger families, through our early intervention, they will continue to receive that support. And of course, we have all the targeted universal services that are out there. And then for our looked after children, as I mentioned before, we have the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, which we apply every year until the age of 16. So we measure how that progresses. And then we have, very importantly, I think we have the feedback of our children, feedback of the carers and the parents, and that always gets considered into our work.
No, thanks. One of the sort of things that comes through your answers certainly is how you work with different agencies and do different things. So obviously, mental health, I think, is one of those things where it's one sort of, well, it's two words really that covers a wide spectrum, needs to be dealt with different ways. So how do you work with external partners? And obviously, for example, obviously CAMHS. So what is that relationship? How do you work with them?
Thank you. I think the multi-agency work, Okay, so partnership, I think there's two important things to say in here. So from a social work point of view, I think there's two types of partnership, two very important types of partnership every time we work with a family. We work in partnership with the family and the children themselves because we think that they are part of their plans, because it's about themselves, about their life, so they are the experts in that area, so we want them to be part of it. And we always encourage them, we always listen to their voice, and we always try to get their views and try as much as possible to make that happen as part of the plan. And then is the relationship with other agencies, with other professionals. And I think there are numerous and very kind of well-established frameworks in which those relationships are happening. So we know, especially in statutory arena, we know very well when we have a child need plan, we have a core group, a child protection conference, look after review, all those sort of very statutory, very well-defined meetings. But I think what comes across very strongly in Hillingdon is our relationship-based working, which is both with the family and the children, but it's also with the partners. And I think people around the table who are not part of the council, as you were, will probably vouch for that good and strong relationship. And I think we do have an open culture. We can challenge one another. We can hold one another to account. And I think majority of us, if not all of us, probably welcome that, and we use that as a positive for improvement of services. The Children Safeguarding Partnership Board, it's also very active in promoting a very good engagement and very good partnership working. And also in the last year we had a escalation policy that's been agreed by all the partners, the safeguarding partners, to make sure that those cases where that formal escalation is required, we have a very well defined pathway. And that's been used a few times. And it works well, but I think the key element is that in every plan, the professions are involved, people are working with one another, are talking to one another, and we all understand that the main reason for why we are there, for why we work together, is to put that child at the centre of everything we do.
Yeah. What about the sharing of information? Because obviously you have, let's say, there's child A with family A, and maybe due to circumstances and also their needs as well, they might be involved with a couple of different agencies, yourself, CAMHS, someone else. In terms of sharing that information between the three of you, how does that work? Is there a process in place? Is there a way it's done in place? So, for example, if one agency picks up something, and then that would go on somebody's record, is that shared with the other agencies, for example, rather than having to repeat, or the other agencies to find out in their own time something that somebody else has picked up over there? Or do you have a way of sharing that information?
Thank you. Yes, most certainly we do, and we have information sharing agreement with various partners around this table and all the other partners to make sure that the information is shared on a need-to-know basis at the point of need and for the right reasons. And we do have we do have our own sort of social care proceedings, if you like, so procedures. So, for instance, if there is a risk, immediate safeguarding risk, what we call Section 47 of the Children's Act, then all the agency can share that information in the interest of protecting the safety of that child. But at the same time, we have since 2021, we have our Stronger Family Hub, which is our one point of entry into the service, if you like, one point of contact, and all the agencies can use that hub to provide information to the service, to log contacts and to log any information they have. Once a child and a family have a social worker and they have a plan ongoing, with the family consent, information is shared between the agencies. So we always ask the family for consent. We always ask the family for permission to share their and their children's information. In some cases, as I said, that consent can be overwritten. Section 47, immediate concern or prevention of crime. But mainly, on the main, that we work with family permission and family consent, and we share information. And to be honest, based on all I know about the current practice, information sharing it's happening between the agency, and it's underlined by some really strong information sharing agreements.
Sorry, I've got two more questions before I open it up. Sorry, I try not to ask too many questions as chair. I've sat in committees where that's been frustrating, but I've got so many questions myself. So apologies if I take all your questions on this, but I've got two more. Then I promise I'll open it up. My first one is my first of my extra questions that I wanted to ask is what Is there a way for children or their families to complain about the service they're getting? Apart, because obviously, in a sense, when children and families are dealing with agencies, it can be intimidating at times because obviously they're dealing with professionals. But if they feel like the service isn't good for any particular reason, is there a mechanism where they can give that feedback and that feedback will be taken on board?
The council's complaints procedure is available to the public. It's available on our website, and every time we write to the families and we write about any.
But that's sledgehammer, though, isn't it? The council's complaints procedure is a sledgehammer way of dealing with something. And what I mean by that is it's a very formal, almost antagonistic stage, to be honest. Mm-hmm. Is there any other way before it gets to that?
It is, and so all the children, and their parents, they absolutely can talk to the social worker, can refer to the social worker's manager, and can ask questions, can ask for various information, and put some informal complaints, if you like, and ask for that resolution. But there is more than that, because, for instance, children who are looked after, they have access to independent advocacy service, which has to be independent, and we commission that from Quorum. And our children do make use of that service, and we know that about 70% of them self-refer, so we tell them about it, we tell them what it is, how to refer, so they don't have to be referred by the social workers or by whoever. They go themselves to the services, to the advocacy service, and they ask for support, and sometimes they complain to us for various things through this service. At the same time, all the looked after children are represented. They have an independent reviewing officer, which is independent of the team, of the management of that team, and their role is to review their plan, is to make sure that their needs are met, and make sure that their voice is heard, and make sure that whatever was said was done is getting done. And they are keeping in touch with the children quite regularly at reviews and between the reviews, and all the children have their contact details, their phone number, emails, and whatever it is, and they can always talk to them outside the kind of social worker and their manager. And so, and for children who are, for instance, child protection, who have a child protection plan, the child protection plans are agreed at the child protection conferences, and again, those are chaired independently by experts who are not part of the team or the social worker or the team manager. They sit outside the team for that very purpose of being independent, having that sort of oversight of the plan. And also, before the conference, for instance, they meet with the family, they meet with the child, and they ask them for their view. They ask them how everything is going for them, and that gets put into the plan, gets put into the conference, and gets escalated if need be to the various areas.
Thank you. And my last question, I promised everyone on this section anyway, is what support do social workers give to schools in this area? Because obviously, if a child is going to school, which hopefully they are, the school obviously will have to manage situations and help as well. So is there any way that the social workers work with the schools and give them support?
I mean, one of the things that I would probably say from my, professional experience is that, social workers are seeing the children sometimes once a week, maybe a bit often, but more often, less than that. Schools are seeing the children every day for half a day, so they have always part of plans, they're always part of a solution, and they're always involved in any planning that we're doing for children. And I think that's why it's important to talk about things like exclusion, school attendance, as mentioned before, because those are really important safeguarding mechanisms for children, and also very important for the emotional well-being. Going back to what we talked about tonight. And social workers are working closely with schools. Definitely, they are in contact with schools quite often. They know the teachers, they know the head teachers, they know them, and there are various ways in which they keep in touch. So I think probably that's one of the partners that are more involved, that are the most involved in children's plan than anywhere else. So there is a good working relationship. At the same time, we have a school child protection advisor for schools, for instance, which meets with all the designated safeguarding leads in schools, and they talk to them about any issues they might be facing. They give advice. They take feedback from them, and the other way around. And also, maybe some of you have done that. Last year we started to do governance training, safeguarding training. So those of you who are governors of local schools, you probably have done that. And so that's very well received, to make sure that we're addressing at that level governance, head teachers forums, and then designated safeguarding leads through the clusters meeting, as we call them, that happen every term, and we bring together all the safeguarding leads, and we talk about both ways, about what support is needed, what's working well, and what we need to improve.
Thank you. That's enough from me, I think. Anybody else got any questions on this section? Jude.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a bit concerned when you talk about the agency all working together, because we are aware that complaints has come in where the agents, where individual children may have issues and problems that's come up, and the parents feel that the agency are not forwarding it on to the different area. So you're saying that, yes, you've got your social workers and the agency all working together to make sure that that child care is taken care of. But that is not the case from our understanding in regards to some parents. They feel that this is not happening. So can you explain a bit more, how does the agency pass that information on, especially if something that really is important or something that is a high risk, maybe given a star or a tag to say, you know, an eye on that? How does that pass through around the different agencies to give the assistance to the individual when they require it?
Are we talking about mental health and emotional well-being? Okay. I mean, in those situations, as I said, if a child has a plan, has an allocated worker, and they have a plan that look at how we're going to meet their needs, then all the professionals who are part of the plan become responsible in their own way for the delivery of that plan. So what we're expecting, and what the Working Together to Safeguard Children legislation also highlights, is the fact that all the professionals should take responsibility for their action, should take responsibility for the actions agreed in the plan, and they should all be talking to one another. And yes, sometimes it does happen that the people, the professionals, are not talking to one another well enough or good enough or quickly enough, and when that's the case, then we have mechanisms of addressing that, and those could be informal or more formal if that's the case. I would also say that we do have learning mechanisms to the Safeguarding Partnership Board, which is Children's Safeguarding Partnership Board, which is monitoring that communication between agencies and how the agencies are working together. And when that gets to a stage when it's kind of really significant in terms of children's needs not being met, then we do learning reviews, for instance, and we extract that learning in a multi-agency way from all of us, and then we disseminate that back into the practice to our practice development forum.
Thank you. I've got one or two. I'll do them together if I may. First is really probably for Nikki more than Alex, or indeed health partners that are with us, and that's the point on page 12 where we're told that the performance data is not applicable. I'm not sure why that is. Perhaps we can have an explanation as to why it's not applicable.
The information in the report is in relation to the recommendation. The recommendation is that the committee notes the report and comments on information presented, so there is no performance information in relation to that recommendation.
Okay, I just might have given us a bit of context, but understood, noted, and that's fine. A couple of questions for Alex, if I may. I mean, it sounds pretty comprehensive, Alex, the way you've put it to us, and I'm encouraged by some of the things I'm hearing, certainly in terms of it being a learning process and a process by which we learn from experience and improve as we go along. I suppose my question, or the first one, is how accessible are these non-statutory services? You know, I mean, you talked about, what, 20,000 referrals for statutory. I didn't catch the percentage that were actually had a statutory assessment, but those that don't get that, what happens to them? How easily can they access non-statutory services, and to what extent are we able to gauge the success of those interventions so that people don't sort of occur again in the system later on, perhaps with greater challenges? And there's one other, if I may, and that relates to schools. We've already touched on schools. And schools, as you rightly say, have a very big part to play in this, and they can do a very good job. But in my experience, looking back, it can be a variable quality. Some of the work that different schools do, some are better than others. In other words, I think there's an Ofsted indicator around this, which may not be unhelpful. I just wonder what your take generally is on the role that schools play and how consistent it is across the board, really, if that's okay. So, is that all right? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. For those in the region of 20,000 contacts, not referrals, the contacts that we receive about various children during the year. Of course, many of them they will have needs that can be addressed by universal services. They can be signposted to various services that are already out there. There is a plethora of services out there, and when we talk about emotional well-being, actually there's quite a lot happening in the community. I think the key is for all of us to understand what's available where and how to tap into those services. And I think probably my colleague Jane might mention that a bit later when we talk about the work that's been done to scope Thrive, for instance, when we map a lot of provisions that are available. So through the Stronger Families Hub, which I mentioned before, is that sort of one gateway into the service. The people who are manning the phones, if you like, people who are kind of responding and talking to the families, they do have access to a lot of information about the availability of services in the borough, and they do try to signpost families to the most appropriate and proportionate service. So coming back to talking about mental health and emotional well-being, I think a very big role to play has the GPs have a big role to play. The primary care through school nurses, through health visitors, through all those health professionals in the community who will spot the signs. And I think also, the schools, because as I said before, the schools themselves, they will see the children quite often. They will see them every day, and they will be in a very good position to spot the signs. The services the families are receiving out there in the community, the non-statutory service, I think they are on the main. They're available and they're helpful. I think there are families who have more complex needs, which they can't be met by universal services. They will require some targeted support or require some statutory support, and those are the ones that I'm talking about when we talk about what the council are offering to those. And I think the other thing that I haven't mentioned, probably it's very relevant to this conversation. It's about the role of the family and extended family and the community play in the well-being of the family, of the well-being of children. We're seeing quite often that the families, when we support them to come together to have things like family group conference or family meetings, if you like, they do find their own solutions. They do find solutions that are sustainable, long term, and they're meaningful to that family. And some of the services we're providing and other people are providing, it is about that. It's about bringing the families together, bringing the people together to wrap around that child and that child's need, and to provide that support. So I think families and communities provide some of that support and can do that, and they do that. I think we have the universal services that are identifying and access through the universal provision out there, through education and health systems, for instance. And also then we have the targeted intervention that I mentioned before through the family hubs, through our early intervention, and then obviously the statutory, which is just a bit more comprehensive than that.
I mentioned schools as well. Yeah. Yeah. Just wondered about the quality of, or rather the consistency across the school's estate of the support that's provided. I know there's some great examples, but it's been variable in the past. What's your sense of where we are on that at the moment, please?
I think probably some of my colleagues in education will be better to respond to this in detail. However, I would say that I know obviously there will be issues with the school now and then, or different schools at the different times. And there are ways in which those concerns are sort of escalated to us, if you like. And if it's about an individual child, as I said before, there are mechanisms of working together in an informal or formal way to address those issues. If the issues are a bit more systemic than that, then our colleagues, for instance, School Improvement, can support with some of that improvement of schools, and other supports that are available around school can be delivered.
Thank you. Rita.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming on from Councillor Nelson's earlier question about sharing information, and if one department diagnoses something. So in your response was all professionals would take responsibility So what processes or measures do you have in place to make sure that there is that follow-up?
Thank you. Every child who has a allocated worker has an allocated social worker. That social worker will take the lead on the plan, and there will be, as part of their role, there will be supporting partners to commit to the actions, and they will be chasing those actions. They will be making sure that they are fulfilled. If they in some cases, for instance, I mentioned independent reviewing officers, child protection conference chairs, all these professionals that are independent of the management of any agency, but they are, as part of their role, they are there to monitor the impact of the plan and the delivery of the plan. That's what they do, and that's what they will always do, about making sure that those actions are happening. And in some instances, I'll come back to that relationship that I mentioned before. In some instances, a face-to-face phone call will resolve some of those barriers, because sometimes there are barriers that can be resolved. Otherwise, other times it's a bit more difficult, and there are formal processes in place to escalate and to address. And there is the overall, I think it's worth saying that the overall safeguarding partnership in Hillingdon, that includes all the safeguarding partners, it's governed by the Executive Leadership Group, which is our ELG, and the Executive Leadership Group has been established based on the Working Together 2018, and that is composed by the 3 statutory agencies who have a equal role and responsibility in safeguarding children. That's the Local Authority Children's Services, that's the police, and is the ICB. We will CCG when that was established. So we have very senior level representation in ELG from those 3 agencies, kind of chief exec type of level in the council and the borough commander, and they are ultimately the ones who are overseeing and are responsible for all those workings of safeguarding in the borough. Now, the Safeguarding Children's Board monitors that, reporting to ELG, but any escalation can go up and down that continuum at any level. So there is a strong accountability framework. There's a strong ways in which we quality assure our work. We keep an eye on what's going on, and then we escalate and we address either individually for that one child, for that one professional, or a bit more systemic if the issue is such.
Right, Shreya has a question. Then I'll give Alex a break, and Jane can give her presentation. So Shreya.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. Early intervention service, working in partnership with local schools to offer a whole school approach in terms of helping in mental health and well-being. Does this include dyslexic issues in pupils at early stage? And if it does, then what is the arrangement in place?
Thank you. I think if we talk about that early identification of issues, if we talk about early identification of needs, the children, including dyslexia as you mentioned, or autism, or any other special educational needs, it's worth mentioning the school obviously have a key role to play on that. And as I mentioned before, there are some various guides and toolkits the school have at their disposal to promote that early identification. And during the last year, one thing that we've rolled out to school, it's called the Early Identification Toolkit, and that looks exactly at those identifying those early signs, and then also provides school with information of where to go, where to ask for help, and in which way they can support some of the needs of the children within the school. So and again, it's one of those. It's a continuum. So it's not. We have a toolkit, we have a guidance, and then that's it. I think that continuous dialogue that we have with schools, that we have with other agencies, with other partners, is crucial to make sure that this toolkit that we have, they evolve, and they always respond to the evolved needs of the children, and also indeed of the schools or other organisations.
Great. Well, thanks, Alex. I'll give you a break because we had a lot of questions. Move on to Jane, who head of joint commissioning from the North West London Integrated Care Board, and Jane, I think partly going to talk about what you commission CAMHS to do, but also it'd be very interesting to hear about the mapping exercises you've been doing, which I've seen, which is really great, and also Thrive as well, which is a really interesting concept. So, Jane, could you switch the mic on? Thank you.
Sorry, I was in a meeting from 5 o'clock, so I haven't had the opportunity to check
so I have
anything.
shared some slides, and I'll happily share them again later, so I will talk to those. So I think you would, in some ways we were just reflecting earlier, actually if we'd had the opportunity to sit down together to share this, because there's some things I'd absolutely look to Tina and Alex to talk about, and there's other things they would look to me, so that we could have, and it'll be interesting to see, I don't want to duplicate what Alex or indeed Tina says, so I'll see how we go. So you...
maybe Tina won't have to say much then.
Do you think? I think
or maybe.
She's got her slides up. So, well, first of all, you were asking, what do we in the ICB commission from the Children and Young People's Mental Health, the Specialist Community Mental Health Service? And I think what I wanted to really point out to that was, yes, we commission a range of services that straddle what used to be called the tiers across mental health. So we commission services at a universal level, and there the examples I had were around primary care support. We also look at where we also commission services that come under the heading of targeted, and we have specific support to the youth offending team where we provide specialist CAMHS worker. We have primary mental health teams, and we have mental health support teams in schools. So we have a very early stages of a program which will be operating eventually across all the schools, where we will have direct access to young people in schools of mental health support. We also we're also just about to, or we are currently recruiting to some ARS roles, which will be mental health practitioners who will be working across primary, community care and secondary care. And we're really excited because I think we're probably going to be one of the first areas in the country where those posts are going to be focusing around children and young people's mental health. We do commission the Specialist Community CAMHS service, and Tina and Paul will talk in detail about what that is and what that delivers. It covers a broad range. So one nice line, there's family support therapy, psychotherapy, there's nurses, there's psychiatrists. There's a range of services and offers from that service. Then separately, and something that we don't commission but I think shows you the way in which it's sort of a holistic approach, is we also are very aware of the specialist child and adolescent beds that are commissioned by NHS England. So what you see when you're looking at child and adolescent mental health is that we need all of those parts to be working together really effectively to offer a range of support around children's mental health and emotional well-being in order to make sure we get the right service to the right child and family at the right time. And one part on its own won't deliver us the successful outcome that we want for children and young people. So that's a little bit about CAMHS, and I think Tina will talk more about them in detail. You also asked me to talk about the services that we as an ICB commission, and I've sort of got a list which I will share with you. One of them is we commissioned P3, who I think the council also employs to do advice and information, and particularly because of that, what we offer is emotional wellbeing support workers who work in a goal-based way with young people. So young people can self-refer, where they will get support and advice around mental health and emotional wellbeing, and sort of a program of support targeted to that young person with what they're presenting with. And quite often what they're presenting with at 13 to 15 is bullying, some kind of school or friendship issues. When they're coming to 16 to 18 to 25, what we're seeing there is that they're coming forward with issues regarding money, work and relationships. So quite a different, what's causing that young person to feel stressed, to feel emotionally distressed, or that is impacting on the mental health. It's different issues at different time, and therefore the service needs to respond to what those issues are. That service actually also offers art therapy, and I think art therapy is beginning to be something which is broadly welcome, and certainly a lot of the young people that are using it are feeding back very positively about the impact it has on their mental health. The ICB, or in Hillingdon as of CCG we commissioned online commissioning called COOF. So we do have a digital offer for young people, which again is they can self-refer to online counselling and support, and that's well used in Hillingdon. Partly, I think, because it's been around for quite a bit, and we've got had a lot of help with our GP colleagues in raising awareness of the fact that it's there as one offer. We commission HACS and also the Centre for ADHD specifically around supporting young people with autism and who are neurodiverse. And we know that that group of young people and children are more likely to experience anxiety and depression, as, not because of, but maybe as part of their neurodiversity. And both those organisations are very good at offering specific help to those groups. I've mentioned the R's roles, and I've briefly mentioned the mental health worker who works as part of the Youth Justice Service. What's interesting from the feedback from that particular service is the number of young men who are presenting to that service quite late with speech and language issues. And I think it's making us think about how and what do we need to do to better do that early identification piece. Why is it that we're seeing those young people present later on? We also commission, if we have services that aren't commissioned from CNW or others, we will also respond to individual commissioning requests. And the one I often think of, because I've had a couple of them recently, is young people coming, GPs asking us for Fragile X assessments, which we have done in the particular, I think, one or two organisations in the NHS that offer that. We offer parent and carer support because I think we do recognise the young person may have a mental health or emotional wellbeing issue, but actually the impact of that, or it may be that their family dynamic or issues around their family are causing their mental health and distress. So it's offering parents and carers support and that young person as well. And we're also very pleased that we've received notification that we've been successful in getting some money to do a 2-year pilot population health management project, particularly helping us to look at what is it that young people want from our mental health and emotional wellbeing offer, how and what do we need to do to refine, improve what that offer is. And I was interested to hear Alex talking about the counselling in young people's languages. So we're getting some feedback from some young people. They're not happy with having to go into a building. They feel concerned, so we want to work with them to understand what is it we need to do to improve that. There particular other groups I would flag were lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual young people, and interestingly young black men. I think we have more to do to make sure that the offer that we have meets their needs. Via the Commissioning Collaborative and through other areas, as you can see, we have a fairly long list of what we commission, as do other organisations. But I would also mention the Hestia Cove, which is the Crisis Cafe offer has been extended to, I think, to 16-year-olds, which is a positive move. And we're looking to enhance and extend that. We recognise that when a young person's having a crisis, A&E is often the only offer. We'd like to broaden out what is possible in the borough. Through CNWL, there's been a range of support commissioned, particularly around 16 to 25-year-olds, to help them transition from children and young people services through into adults, recognising that it's a challenging time for any young person. If you have mental health issues and you are needing to continue with that support going forward, it's a totally different world, and how do we help you manage that? And the other service that I mentioned, and I think Tina will probably talk a little bit more about, is ACTS, which is a community service which offers a bit of a halfway house between a hospital bed and being able to support somebody in their own home. So a range of services that we commission, that working with Tina, with colleagues, and with Alex, we're trying to make sure that the young people and their families find the right way to the right service when they need it. A young person said to me recently, I want services that I can access from people that look like me, sound like me, and have my life experience. And I think that's a really powerful message for us to think about as we move forward with this important area. So I won't try to talk through the key indicators because I think it's probably not going to be a helpful thing to do, but I will share those.
And we can read those and come back to your questions.
Absolutely, and I think they're very specific about, I looked at the specialist CAMHS service, but all of our services, what we would say to them is, we want young people to have an individualised plan. We want you to see how they feel at the beginning of it, and what we're looking for is an improvement at the end. Okay, so moving on to Thrive. The model I just talked about, or the service I just spoke about, was offered in tiers, and the idea being that you had to climb up each of those tiers. Each time you felt you didn't get what you needed from the next tier, you had to move on. Thrive is basically shifting our way of thinking and helping us to think about needs-based groups where the needs and we're looking at sort of turning that and recognising that it's this system approach. What we're aiming to have is thriving and resilient children and young people and their families, and it's how do we do that? When is it that young person, rather than needing a mental health service, needs advice, or do they need some help? Do they need more help, or are they looking at a level where actually they need to have their risk is at such a level that they really need risk support, which really are the specialist services. I'm afraid I can't do it justice without the pictures, so bear with me and I will share the slides. What do we do? Where and how does it fit in Hillingdon? We recognise, we have done a mapping, and there is a very colourful array of services that cover the 4 segments. Where I can get advice from, where can I get help from, where can I get more help, and a smaller group around the specialist area. We're working with partners together to sort of sift through that and make sure that we all have a shared understanding that in having the conversation with our stakeholders, what we're finding is that some people described a service as getting help, which other people thought was further around the segment. So we need to do some work with people to make sure we're all sharing the understanding of where a service fits and how people can access that. The other thing the Thrive model wanted us to do was to assess how good are we at a macro, meso and a micro level. And listening to Alex was talking about how good are we at those interagency organisational relationships, how good are we at supporting people with particular young people and a particular care group, and also how good are we at delivering services on a one-to-one basis. So that assessment again is something we've just begun, and we're taking back to colleagues just to check out and widen that the assessment that we did is a fair reflection. There's some things it looks like we're pretty good at, and actually what we're really wanting to understand is, well, where is it that we really do need to target some more effort and some more work to help improve. So early stages. We're doing that in Hillingdon, but that's actually as part of the North West London ICB's aspiration that we have a thriving North West London community. So I think that was my last slide. Yeah. So I'm happy to take questions.
That's great. Thank you very much. Now, I like the idea of the Thrive model because the tiered model seems to me to be one of those things where you might end up in a situation where if somebody doesn't meet a tier, then they might not meet a tier. So medically and professionally, that's how you assess things. But obviously the parents don't really understand that because their child is not, is in trouble. So the tier system, I think, is something that can cause problems. So the Thrive system in terms of needs-based help sounds very good for me. But when the other committee members get the slide of the quadrant, what they'll see there's so many potential services offered, which in one sense is great, but the other sense is, how do people know, how do parents and other gatekeepers, if they're GPs or if they're social workers, know who to refer to and can do it as quickly as possible? And the reason that's important is, firstly, obviously, early interventions hopefully will stop mental health issues getting worse, which is extremely important, especially if you talk about not attending school and all this sort of stuff, which can have great impacts later on. But also, as well, the problem is that if people don't understand how to refer or how to get that help, in the end, they refer to CAMHS. And so you get a situation potentially where CAMHS get lots of referrals, which actually might not have been the best place to go to because it's the one that most people know about. So what can be done, or what is being done, in order to allow parents and other gatekeepers to understand how best to refer children as quickly as possible?
I think we need to take that mapping exercise and the assessment. We need to continue the work that we're doing so that we get a shared understanding, and then we can look to work collectively and together to get that out digitally in some way, sort of onto the web, so people can, as many people as that have access to the digital world can access that, with the explanation of what can I self-refer to, what does the service do, how do I get there. It's something that I think it's something that I haven't seen an answer to over the last few years. But I think we somehow need to simplify what we've got. We are looking, I think, at this idea of the child's mental health hub, and whether that then becomes some kind of central triaging route for as much of those services as possible is something we need to explore and understand how we could do that and what the cost of that would be. And ideally, I think we're recognising we have child health hubs, mental health hubs, stronger families hubs, children's centres. We're wanting to look to see how do we work together to come up with something that makes sense for the population of Hillingdon from that mental health and emotional wellbeing instance. But I think we're committed to do that together.
I think that's something we'd definitely like to look into as well. Does anybody have any questions for Jane before we move on to Tina? Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, thank you for an interesting presentation. I'm glad to see you're working with P3. I declare an interest. I used to be chair of the organisation that was before P3. We merged with them. But just on the other aspect, you said you're measuring outcomes. Do you do that across all your services? Because I like the idea of measuring outcomes, how you're preventing mental health, etc. And do you do that across all? I didn't quite catch if you did it across all your areas.
We do it across all of the services that were sort of originally commissioned in Hillingdon. There's currently a conversation going on with colleagues in CAMHS about what's the right way to measure outcomes. But certainly talking to an individual practitioner will want to say, how did you feel when you came into the service, and how do you feel when I'm going? So that's how do we collect? I think from a CNWL point of view, it's about how do we collect and collate that in a meaningful way that we can then feed back. So I think the answer is yes, broadly. Is that fair? Yeah.
Philip.
Two quick ones, Jane. Did I hear you say ADHD and autism support are funded for services for Hillingdon residents? I thought I heard you say that, and there's just one other, if I may, and it's around how commissioning is working on a regional basis now for Hillingdon, and I just wondered how it's all bedding in. Are there any lessons coming out of it? Is it working well? Are there opportunities that it's bringing to the table perhaps that weren't there before? Thank you.
So I did mention Centre for ADHD. Sorry, I can't remember, and certainly HACS. We do commission both of them. CAS is actually commissioned on a North West London wide level to provide an autism offer for adults. We've commissioned HACS locally to do some work around pre-diagnosis. So slightly different arrangements. With regard to the ICB, the Mental Health, Learning Disability and Autism Programme has got a series of programme boards which are open to ourselves in the borough. So my title is actually Head of Joint Commissioning Hillingdon. So the programme boards that exist, one of which is Children and Young People's Mental Health, is open, has a wide membership both from the borough team, from our local authority colleagues from CWR, and it's a place where we come together to look to make decisions or make recommendations about service delivery. And at the moment, today I was at a meeting when they were announcing the fact that there is some additional resources to come to North West London for eating disorder services. So beginning a conversation there about what and where should that money be. With regard to Hillingdon, I feel it is my role as a member of the borough team to influence at that level, at the table, to say this is what we need in Hillingdon, this is what we're doing in Hillingdon, and working with colleagues in CNWL and others to make sure that when funding is given, we match that to what is available already. So I think it's early days, and I think it's a very different way of working, but I was delighted to get the funding for the population health management bid, particularly around mental health. I think the opportunity to pilot things is there as well.
Right, so we'll move on to Tina and Paul from CAMHS, and you've got a PowerPoint presentation for us. So can you just turn your mic on? Sorry, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I will touch on some of the points that Jane has raised, just in terms of triangulation, really, which I hope colleagues will find helpful. Technology is eluding me. Right. helpful.
I mean, if the slides aren't working, you could speak to them because you've got some paper copies there and send them to us. But yes, obviously, we're not going to let.
We've got a copy here.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah. so we do have hard copies actually ourselves. So let's not worry about the technology and let's look at the paper. Yeah, let's just go with the paper, I think. Sorry, Mike again. Mike, yeah.
Do apologise, sorry. So the first slide just describes the routes into CAMHS, and I thought it would be quite helpful just to pictorially display the entrance points. And as you'll see, there are numerous points within the system where young people may come into contact with our services. What we probably haven't articulated here on this slide as well as we could have was actually we have a single point of entry. So there's a 24-hour service that children, young people, families can ring and get advice and support from a mental health practitioner, and quite often that will be quite a detailed conversation with advice, support, and giving young people an opportunity to explore what some of those difficulties are, and then on the back of that giving them an opportunity to signpost to services. If they require a referral to another service within CAMHS, and we would make that referral, and that would happen quite quickly. And just picking up one of the points around information sharing, so that information would then be shared with the GP and with relevant professionals as required. Our biggest point of referral is by far primary care, and so the work that we're doing around the R's roles that Jane mentioned earlier is going to be really important in terms of our continue to support children and young people at the earliest opportunity, and to be a bridge between primary care and other services that they may be able to access. So that's a really fantastic opportunity. We take referrals from social care, paediatrics, community paediatrics, our urgent care team. So if a young person is seen and assessed in A&E and they require an onward referral, then that would be made by the team as well. And obviously education, they're a huge partner in our work with children and young people. So just moving on. So again, as Jane mentioned, we work with a number of partners, and this is in the context. So if we're thinking about Thrive, we're thinking about needs-led services. Our early help offer is really around getting help at the earliest opportunity. So we do have a close relationship and support COOF. We have an under 5 service, and the under 5 service chronologically is for under 5, so they are chronologically young, but quite often these children, these very small children, have a level of need. So it's about working with the parents, looking at parent training, looking at role modelling, education, so that we're able to stop any difficulties that are coming up very early on, and have some targeted support, and then hopefully discharge them on. We've got the mental health in schools, which again Jane mentioned earlier. We've got the child wellbeing practitioners, so again working with children at the earliest opportunity to manage some of the low-level mental health difficulties that they may be experiencing, and as I said earlier, we've got the R's roles. So just moving on. In terms of core CAMHS, so I've just supplied some data in relation to numbers of referrals and numbers of young people that are coming into service. We, as mentioned previously here, we've done a huge amount of work to manage our waiting times, and we've seen a significant drop in the number of children and young people waiting for assessment, but then waiting for first and second treatment. So those figures have continued to come down.
Sorry, the second treatment line's going up actually.
Has
on
it?
mine, I think it is. Is that the second treatment line? There is a middle line.
There is a middle line, yes.
And that is actually going up, isn't it?
Yeah, that has. Thank you, Chair.
So is that the second treatment one?
It is,
okay,
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I will do some data quality around that because the overall treatment line is still coming down.
It would be good, maybe if not now, but maybe you can come back to us about what's going on
Yeah.
with that particular line. That'd
Yeah.
be good.
That's absolutely fine. I will do that. Thank you. And so just in relation to Thrive and picking up again Jane's earlier point, we've done a huge amount of work around goal-based interventions. So working with children around need, so they have a goal-based intervention, have maybe 6 or 12 sessions. We assess with them the impact of that goal-based intervention. Quite often they're able to be discharged, but if they need to come back into service, they're able to come back in far quicker, and that's been hugely beneficial. Should we move on to the next slide? I'm going to run through them just to allow time for questions.
Yeah, that's good, thank you.
And so I've just supplied some information in relation to referral data. So you'll see the numbers referred and accepted and declined, which I thought might be quite helpful for you to see. And just picking up on Alex's point, we're also looking at alternative forms of intervention for children and young people. So we're looking at art psychotherapy, we're looking at pets for therapy as different alternatives, because not all children and young people want to engage in a talking therapy. So it's about thinking holistically about the needs of the children that are coming into service. Just to note that the caseload of CAMHS for the Hillingdon CAMHS at the moment is around 1,500 young people we've got on our caseload at the moment, and we get around 50 referrals a week, so it's quite a busy service. I wanted to just share some of the work that we're doing around participation. So with children and young people, they absolutely are at the centre of everything we're doing, and we have regular participation groups with children and young people. We've got dedicated participation workers within the service. We've also just set up a parent and carer shadow board and a children and young people shadow board. So they really hold us to account and challenge us around what we're doing and how we're commissioning and delivering services. And we also have dedicated feedback weeks. So, for example, the Hillingdon Core CAMHS service may have a feedback week next week. So young people and families are encouraged to give informal feedback, draw posters around their experience, put feedback in boxes. So it's just drawing on different forms of feedback that's informal. We also do routine site visits, so I often go around the sites, speak to young people, speak to the staff, get feedback about their experiences, and we have the friends and family test, which all NHS services do. So there's multiple touch points in the service in terms of gaining that feedback. And then the last slide is just looking at our urgent care team. So again, Jane mentioned the ACT service. They offer an alternative to children and young people that would otherwise have a period of stay in hospital. So they offer intensive community support to the young person, but more importantly, not more importantly, but as important, they offer support to the families, because having a child or young person that would otherwise be in hospital can be incredibly challenging for parents and for siblings within that household. So it's making sure that there is support for the young person, but also support for that wraparound for the family, so that hopefully the child could potentially continue to go to school and have the support from their local network. And they do an amazing job. So I think I'm going to stop there.
Thank you.
And
take
questions.
Thank you. I'll ask for questions from the committee. Sharia.
Thank you, Chairman. It says on the report that 636 referrals were declined. Can you please expand on this? How did these high numbers of referrals were declined, and what was the main reasons?
So what I'm hoping to do at a later meeting, if it's acceptable, is to do more of a deep dive around our data. So we didn't have an opportunity for this meeting, but for an up-and-coming meeting, we will do more of a deep dive around the referrals that weren't accepted, why weren't they accepted, where were they signposted to, so that we can triangulate that information and share that with you. So I'm happy to bring that to another meeting.
We're likely to invite you back in June, if that gives you enough time, so thank you.
Thank you. Yes, forgive me, I can't see your name, please, and I missed your name, so Tina, thank you very much. Lovely. Tina, in relation to referrals, when cases are referred to you, it can clearly take some time before an assessment takes place, and still longer for any intervention to be delivered in a clinical way. I just wonder, given that, what information is provided for other support services that may make a difference on that while people are waiting, if you like. So when you get those referrals, how is that working? And the other question for me is, you clearly get an awful lot of referrals. I know some time ago we were concerned about whether in the primary care estate there was adequate awareness of non-statutory services that could actually make a difference, and whether perhaps people do arrive at your service who might perhaps have been usefully signposted elsewhere, possibly. Do you come across that? So 2 questions there, if you would, please.
Thank you. So in relation to the primary care, we get young people coming through the service that may have been signposted to other services, and if they've been waiting for our service, we may suggest that they try another service in the interim. So I think what we try to do is maximise the opportunities that children have to get advice and support as early as possible. Quite often when we do an assessment, and I'll take the SPA as an example, so if a child or a parent was to phone up, they could have a detailed assessment, and that may include signposting to a non-statutory service, for example COOF, whilst they're waiting for core CAMHS services. The other thing that we do to make sure that we're continuing to have a touch point with children and young people is, whilst they're on the waiting list, we have a Waiting Well initiative. So we would have a touch point at regular points during their journey if they're waiting for assessment or for treatment, and we'll reassess how are you doing at the moment, are there things that we can do to support you in the interim, and that might also be another opportunity to get some advice and support for them at a different point. Has that answered your...
A quick supplementary, Chairman, if I may. Yes, that's useful to know. So if I were a parent, hypothetically, with a child who was who's having a referral, and you would have to wait so many weeks, you'd be coming back to me and say, well, Mr. Cawthorne, there are these alternative things that you might want to try for your child. So and things like COOF are available on demand, are they? So there's not something people got to wait for.
No. So our young people wait about 6 weeks for an appointment. It may be slightly less, but it's around the 6-week mark. And there are a range of services that they can access during that time, including COOF. And if they accessed any of those services, it wouldn't stop them from continuing their journey with CAMHS.
Thank you. Tony.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of quick questions, really. The routes into CAMHS, obviously the normal ones, they've got to come from them. A parent can't refer their child on their own to CAMHS, can they?
Yes, they can refer their young person into CAMHS. So they could come via the SPA. So a parent could call and say, I think my young person needs to be seen within CAMHS. So we would take that information, and dependent on the age of the child, we would try and seek the child's consent as well, particularly if they're an older child. But yes, they can refer in.
Okay, I presume that is in the other sources on your slide.
Yes.
That'd be one of the other sources, would be directly. And also on your outcome of referral, you've got urgent 5. What constitutes routine and urgent?
So we have multiple points where, so if I give an example, so if a young person has been seen in A&E or in the emergency department, a referral will have been, an assessment will have been done by the team, and they may make an urgent referral to the core CAMHS service for them to be seen very quickly. So that would constitute that sort of referral. Or if a GP has made a referral with significant concerns about a young person's or the SPA, we would triage them and then make a decision about how quickly we need to see them. But it's always dependent as well on additional information. So if we got information that suggested that it had come through as routine, but we assessed it as being urgent, we would see it as an urgent referral.
I'm just surprised there's only 5 since the 1st of April last year to the end of January. There's only 5 urgent on your slide. 801 routine. It just perhaps the wording is baffling me.
I will check that for you and come back. Yes.
Rita.
Thank you, Chair. Tina, we talked about you said 6 weeks for an appointment time. So do you, and that's a long time for the families to be waiting. So do you actually have a service level agreement by within which time you've had a referral, and how quickly you need to respond to that referral to the families? And if so, are they being met? And I know you said you're going to do a deep dive exercise into your data, so that would be quite useful if you could produce some service level agreement information.
That's probably a question, yeah.
On the list that I haven't been able to share tonight, we can see the key performance indicators and where the data is being and how they are performing. Looking at it recently, there have been no reds. I monitor it when I receive the reports on a monthly basis, and they have all been green. So the service is meeting the KPIs. I guess there's probably in some respects a question about, is that an acceptable time for someone to wait? But coming back to this, certainly from the cases or the working with the local services, P3 will hold a case whilst they wait for CAMHS. So we're getting, and we're trying to ensure that we don't want people left on their own, but sometimes it's about providing the support that they want. Sometimes families don't want anything other than CAMHS, so we're trying to work with people to give them the response, the service that they want when we can.
If I can add to that answer, you were asking whether we're meeting the targets. The national target for what's called referral to treatment is an 18-week target. So that's a national standard. Now, for CAMHS, what that means is from the time of referral to the second appointment, do we or don't we see the young person within 18 weeks? And over the past year, Hillingdon CAMHS service has seen over the past year consistently above 90% of cases within 18 weeks, and certainly for the last 4 months has seen 100% of cases within 18 weeks. So in other words, from referral to first to second contact.
Sorry, just a quick supplementary question then. That's a long time in my mind, and especially if, we talked about the families and, the extended families, the siblings, etc. So to my mind, that's a long time. Is there anything that you have in place that could reduce that, or, what support is available to the families then?
So that waiting time standard is for specialist CAMHS. So in terms of Thrive, that that is one of the highest quadrants. So there are mental health in schools, there are CWPs, there are other opportunities for that child. There is P3, so there are other services that we're able to put in place to support that family, because we recognise that the wait feels like a long time. So whilst the waiting times have come down considerably, we are doing everything we can to make sure we keep those as short as possible, but we put the levels of support in whilst they are waiting.
June.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to follow through on that because we have had parents who came to us and make reference and complain about the waiting time. But then you're saying 18 weeks. They say they wait about 12 weeks. But not only that, there was no guidance or direction of other part of the agency to intervene and help that parent through the waiting of their child that is suicidal, to give a clear diagnosis of what their problem is. So that causes concern not only for the child but for the parent, because the parent is the one who is literally identifying the different issues that the parent is seeing within with their child. So you saying that there is that waiting period, but the agency that's involved, it doesn't seem to be linking up together to help that parent through that waiting period, so that they can not only get the diagnosis but get their case to be registered and have their own case study for that child, to help to take that child through. So how do you link with those individuals, you as CAM, but the other agency? And I'm coming back, I think I raised that question earlier with you. How does that work? Because there seems to be a link or a chain break in the midst of it all in regards to helping that process through. And that's what we're getting back from parents, that yes, we're waiting. Schools are helpful with the child in regards to counselling. Sometimes social services is there helpful, but the agency that enable that to move around, to help to bring it back into the midst of CAMHS, who provides the service, is not there to help. So how does that work?
So not knowing the particular case that you're referencing, what I can say is that, and if we're taking the situation of a young person that's suicidal, if they have been seen by services, I would expect that there are conversations with the agencies involved with that young person around how they can support them whilst they're waiting. And then a good example would be school. So CAMHS would quite often have a conversation with the school and say, we need to put a plan in place so when the young person is at school, if they are feeling distressed, they have a plan that they can come out of class and have some time with one of the pastoral care support workers. So we would look to parallel plan with the agencies that are involved with the young person.
I hear you on that, but the parent is the one that really who is suffering, because the parent is the one who is not able to feel that the system is working for them. They feel that the system is letting down not only the parent, who obviously is anxious and concerned, but also for the child that they are concerned, which is their child, in their mental well-being. Because, for instance, as I said, the child is suicidal, but yet still reference doesn't make that the child is suicidal at the time. The child make a threat, but that threat can be a suicidal threat, because no one knows when your mental health is really terrible what you're going to do. So that parent felt very let down with the system in regards to getting the help that they require. The school system helps. The school system helps to push through to the other agency that needs to pick up, to bring the whole agency together to help that child, and it's not working because The mum is with the school is trying, but where the school have access to the agency is not responding. So there is some lack of linkage, but there is a lack of how the system works and how the communication goes around to give that parent reassurance that things are moving, even though there's a time scale set, even though they have to wait, that support is not there for that individual. And it's not one, it's not two.
Just on following up on June's point, if it doesn't work in the way that you've described, and as June says, we've spoken to parents who say it hasn't worked in the way that it's described, I mean, what happens? Who do they complain to, and how is that complaint looked at, and then what is done? Because we have heard stories of, consistent falling through the gaps on this stuff. So I just wondered what are the processes you have in place for that?
So we do have a robust complaints process, but what I've been encouraging the teams to do is, if a parent or a young person or indeed a professional is giving us feedback, that we listen to that we meet with them and hear the concerns that they have and try to understand what happened and try and break it down, and then to work through a resolution with them. So we would genuinely always welcome feedback, so they can go back to the team that they've been referred to and offer that feedback. And I would expect that there is a conversation between the parents and the team around, so what happened, what didn't we do, what do we need to do differently, and what was the learning, because that's not okay that people feel that way.
I'm going to use an example from my own personal professional life, if I can say that. That's a bit of a mangled way, but I work in law, and in law, if you basically take a client on, at the bottom of a letter, it's regulatory. You have to say, regulator says you have to do this. You have to say what the complaints procedure is and who you can complain to if you're not happy with the complaints procedure, legal ombudsman or the regulator, the SRA. So if anything goes wrong, the client, who essentially in a legal relationship obviously knows a lot less than the lawyer, or hopefully does anyway if they've got a good lawyer, knows exactly what to do. Now I wonder, is it clear to a parent who's in a situation who's maybe not getting the service they deserve what to do at that stage in a similar sort of way? And the reason I ask that is because obviously the parents are going through a lot of stress, as June says, and the child's going through a lot of stress. So is it obvious to them, if they're not being treated in the way that you describe, that there is a process that they can follow in order to get that resolved?
I would like to think yes. So there's information on our website, on the individual CAMHS websites. There's information within the context of our social media, but I think your challenge is around whether or not it's easily accessible for people, and I think that's something that we can go back and test that hypothesis, whether or not the information is out there as freely and as easily as people would expect.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously the reason I ask is, in any system, in any workplace, mistakes will happen and issues will arise, and that's just completely natural. I think actually what makes the difference between well-functioning and not well-functioning organisations is how they deal with those when they turn up. And I think that's, and obviously we are aware, because we've spoken to some families who've been involved in the process. The amount of stress and pressure that are on the families is immense. And you can understand that. And I think in order to make it as easy for them to provide that feedback, and then that feedback to get dealt with, I think would be beneficial for anyone. So I have one last question before I wrap this up, because we've got other people to speak, and we'll be talking about this more, and it's sort of a bit related. Do you have standards for communication? And the reason I ask this, again, is because I think this happens in the medical world. It can happen in the medical world a lot. Obviously, you have your job to do, CAMHS has its job to do, and maybe a child doesn't meet a threshold, for example, so they won't get help from CAMHS, which is obviously that CAMHS has to have a threshold. But the parent themselves, they're not interested in thresholds. They're whatever, even if they don't meet if their child doesn't meet the threshold for CAMHS help, there's something not good going on and a stressful situation going on. And there is potential, if the communication isn't great, that they feel like they're being either undermined in terms of what they're reporting, or they're being told to go away and come back when something worse happens. And obviously no one wants that, because, go away when your child actually cuts themselves rather than threatening to cut themselves, for example. And that's obviously not the message that wants to be given. So, and also, secondly, on the communication aspect, of course, communicating with children in this way, I assume everyone who works at CAMHS has special training in order how to communicate, because obviously, in very sensitive situations. So on the first point, is there a sort of standards of communications that those who work for you have to meet?
So we have, as a team, we have a vision and purpose, and the way we communicate and work with children and families is absolutely central in terms of openness, transparency, honesty, and certainly in my experience, if a child or young person hasn't met the threshold for a service, then being really clear about the reasons why, but also giving the parent or young person the options that are available if they don't meet the threshold. And I think we do work on the basis that it's a transactional relationship with children, young people and their families. So we try to be as open and honest as possible, and certainly where we fail in that, I think we need to hear that feedback, and we need to take proactive steps to rectify that situation for that child or young person, but also for other families that we see, because it is a partnership. We're partners with the young person, with their family, we're partners with colleagues across the system, and so we have to operate in that context.
Good. Okay. Well, I think we'll leave it there for now on CAMHS, because we've got our next meeting. We're going to be looking at it again, and then we're going to look at it again in June. So once we've discovered more, we'll probably come back to you with more questions and ideas, hopefully. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming and talking to us, because I think this has been really insightful and interesting. So you're welcome to leave the meeting, or you're welcome to stay and listen to other reports that are on the agenda as you wish. So we're going to move on now to item 6, which is the phlebotomy service update. And Richard, you're going to give us that presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. And thank you to the committee for the opportunity to come back and give our regular update on progress with the adult phlebotomy service. This report is brief, but I'd be very happy to answer any questions or to hear members' comments on the service. I hope you think that we have continued to deliver on the benefits and the improvements of a more practice-based, more locally based phlebotomy service. And we have certainly tried to embed some of the initially very favourable perceptions of the service from patients and from practitioners. But I think the opportunity of the update is also to give you some developments that we've introduced since our last report. Also, of course, to address some of the challenges and unexpected issues that have naturally arisen in the service. And just to look forward to the future and talk about potential areas that we're looking to develop in the future. And again, your comments and thoughts on that would be very welcome. So first of all, the service now has been running for almost 2 years, and I think, as you'll see from the little activity plan in section 1, we anticipated, based on our knowledge of hospital-based phlebotomy activity, that we would be seeing around 180,000, 185,000 blood tests per year. This financial year, we expect to see fewer than that. We expect to see around 165,000. And I think it's quite interesting to look at the reasons for that reduction. First, I think what is reassuring is that there is some additional capacity within the system, so that if more requirements come, during the year. We think the system will be able to absorb that activity, so that's reassuring. I think the other reason potentially is that some patients within the hospital system might have been referred by the hospital for repeat recurrent blood tests that perhaps weren't always necessary, and perhaps with a more local GP-initiated system has been able for the GP and the patient to say, do we need this test? Perhaps we'll leave it for another couple of months. And so there's a coherent and there's a clinical reason for that reduction. Third, I think, as always within health and care, don't let's rule out that some of the original data might have been wrong. There might have been some overestimates. But I think now we are beginning to obviously to get some real activity that we can be reporting to you. And I think that is also linked to one of the issues that we have experienced this year that I mentioned in the report, that there have been a couple of logistical issues where fewer tests were able to be carried out as far as we expected. One was a national issue about shortage of the blood bottles where the blood was collected and sent to the labs. That probably went on, and I'm looking to read to, probably for around 6 or 8 weeks on and off. It was at one stage blamed on Eastern European conflicts, but then a great many things were blamed on that.
Is that the new health and safety?
That's probably, yes, that's right, exactly. But I'm pleased to say that those supply issues have now been rectified. But quite clearly, then that would mean that there were fewer samples taken in that period, and the GP might well have decided that test wasn't as necessary as they would have otherwise done. Moving on from the activity, one new service development that we've developed is looking at urgent blood tests. And I think, as we touched on in the previous discussion, there's quite an important definitional issue to be made here. First of all, any patient, or indeed any clinician, will think that the blood test that they're concerned with is urgent and absolutely must be expedited as soon as possible. And I absolutely appreciate that. The fact is that the vast majority of blood tests are routine in the sense that they are required for ongoing monitoring of patients' health, and the results coming back within 1 or 2 working days is perfectly acceptable from the clinician's point of view, and hopefully also from the patient's point of view. And that is the vast majority of the blood tests that go through the system. They go to the labs, they're processed, the results are back in the GP's inbox, within the next couple of working days, and that's fine. However, we identified a need for some urgent tests whereby the results, which would be defined by the results being required to be back the same day that the clinician has seen the patient, so that the patient's management can be reviewed or, if necessary, modified. And I think that's a valid definition of urgent. And you'll see in halfway down the second page, you'll see some categories and some criteria that we've set out for that, that provided the patient is being seen in the morning, their blood can be taken in a morning clinic, got to the lab by 1:30, so that the results can be back in a couple of hours during surgery, after in clinic, and the GP can be contacting the patient. And we have obviously built in a system whereby, unfortunately, not all urgent patients turn up in the morning, and the process that we carry out for an afternoon urgent sample, whereby the sample can be got onto the van, going to the labs. The lab will process them quickly because they're marked urgent, and results, if outside particular clinical norms, we have a system whereby the lab, through 111, can be contacting the patient if required, and a support given either through the GP out-of-hours service or through A&E. I hope that's clear. We can obviously talk through that if necessary. I think a couple of other challenges that we've identified. One of them was the bottle shortage. The other was staffing, which clearly is an important part of practice-based phlebotomy. We put an awful lot of work in the first 6 or 9 months of the service. Clearly there were opportunities for hospital-employed staff to be re-employed by the practice to undertake the clinics. What we've now found, obviously, in the last 6 months or so, is there has been staff turnover. There have been some vacancies. There have been some long-term sickness in some practices, and there has been a training program to train perhaps healthcare assistants who would be interested in developing as phlebotomists, and some of that has not gone as quickly as we had hoped, and there have been some delays for an individual practice to recruit an individual phlebotomist to cover the Tuesday afternoon clinic, and there have been some delays in meeting that as quickly as we would have wanted. So I know that both at practice level and also at the Hillingdon Borough team level, we've dealt with a number of questions and complaints, either from yourselves or from patients, and I'm really sorry about those initial logistical issues around that. We think we have certainly resolved the majority of those. I hope that we've resolved all of them, and naturally you will tell us as and when you're getting concerns from your constituents. There was also a specific issue which provided some complaints and concerns in paragraph 3, where individual practices were offered the opportunity of running blood-taking services themselves at practice level. The majority of practices wanted to do that, wanted to see their own patients themselves. Some practices, either because of being a relatively small size or for staffing issues, wanted to join forces and to share the resources, and for patients of practice A to go to practice B for their blood to be taken. And that system worked well up to a point until it didn't, when the practice who was undertaking the tests on behalf of other practices found demand was higher than they had originally expected, or that capacity was insufficient, or that patients were being referred on a Thursday when actually that clinic had been on a Wednesday or a Friday. So there were some bottlenecks in that, and again, that was a real concern for those practices. It was a real concern for patients, and hopefully we have resolved that now. I think what is very interesting about that model of practices grouping together to undertake particular services on each other's behalf is that we're beginning to explore that for other services over and above phlebotomy. We will, in primary care in Hillingdon, but also elsewhere in North West London, begin to be doing more ECG services at practice level, more ongoing blood pressure monitoring at practice level. And again, we will begin to be talking to practices and hopefully reporting back to yourselves as to whether there's an opportunity perhaps for a north, a central and a southern hub for a number of diagnostic services so that patients from a particular geographical area can go there for those diagnostic services rather than needing to go to the hospital. And again, hopefully we will get the same support from patients of having a local service, locally arranged, and not, I think as we mentioned on page 1, some of the historical issues of going to the hospital, waiting a couple of hours for a test that actually only took 5 minutes to do once they got to the front of the queue.
But that was always good reading time, Richard.
I'm so sorry to take that away, but I'm sure that frees up time to be out in the open and out in the fresh air. I think the only other point that I will make is in paragraph 4, where, of course, the routine clinical activity of phlebotomy, where the GP wanted the blood test to be taken but had to send the patient to the hospital. We are finding more hospital clinicians saying, oh, if your GP is taking your blood, then when the hospital consultant needs to have your blood for a particular outpatient appointment, then please go to your GP to have that blood, rather than going down the corridor to the hospital phlebotomy clinic to be taken. Now, I think this is a really basic and a really practical issue where the success of the Integrated Care Board in joining up some of the different bits of the health service will really be tested. Because a really simple task like that clearly has knock-on implications for GP workload. It may be less convenient for the patient who is in the hospital at the time for the outpatient appointment to actually go to the GP and make an appointment for the blood to be taken. There is, of course, an IT issue because the blood will have been requested on behalf of the consultant for a particular clinical purpose that the clinician knows but that perhaps the GP does not know or is not familiar with, and it will be the consultant's name on the blood request. It'll come into the GP practice, the results will come into the GP practice for the first time, and the GP will not know that the test was ordered, why it was ordered, or what the significance of the results were. Really simple, but as you all know, the ramifications of that to be easily resolved are quite challenging. We really want to work on it and to work between general practice, the hospital and the laboratory to tackle it. We want to work in Hillingdon with other hospitals elsewhere in North West London, Chelsea and Westminster or Mary's, and of course also with other specialist hospitals elsewhere in London. We've had a number of issues, for instance, of Great Ormond Street, seeing a child saying, oh, we need blood taken for the next appointment, please go back and see your GP for it. These are can be quite specialist, maybe some cancer related, some liver related for the children, and the GP may not be in the position to interpret the result as it comes back. But all of this consistent with getting care and diagnostics as close to the patient and as close to the GP practice or the primary care network as possible. All of that is consistent with it, and I think we need to work through the ramifications of that. CNWL colleagues have left, I think, but the same issue would also be for CNWL initiated some blood tests required by the mental health psychiatrists and by community services. Very, very simple, as I say, to ask for, a lot more difficult to resolve in practice. I think I'll stop there, Chairman, but of course very happy to try and answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Richard, for your update, and I and June remember when you came to us in July 2021 to talk to us about this plan, and I think initially we were supportive of the idea, but did worry about how certain things would get done. But as you've covered off in detail in that report, I think a lot of the problems that have been identified have been covered off. And from a personal point of view, I've experienced the move, and it's better, and despite my lack of reading time, which gets filled up now with other house chores that I have to do apart from sitting down and reading. But anyway, it is more convenient in general and has worked well. Also, to be honest, I've received next to no complaints about it myself in the last 6-7 months, which is obviously a sign. So anyway, but June, you would like to make a point.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I was here when you announced what was going to happen with the GP, and I actually went hands up, yes, let it happen, because of the long wait we had to do at Hillingdon Hospital waiting for blood. It has worked. I haven't heard anybody complaining. I myself don't complain because I have regular blood tests, and I'm happy to book an appointment, get my appointment done in time, so I don't have to hang about in long lanes. So that's worked perfectly. My only issue is the hub. Looking at the hub and what you've just said about the hub, bringing practice together in the hub, it would work very well. My only concern is, please do not let it be a privatized private practice hub. Let it remain as an NHS hub for NHS patients, because sometimes these hubs come together, the private practice come together, you got these private individuals who would like to deliver services, and we know the outcome of what that is. So that is my only concern about the hub, but the hub sounds very well because it will integrate everything instead of having people to go from one hospital to the other, to the other, to the other. And it can be very tedious to patients who have very complex illnesses and having to do long travel, and it impacts on their health, but also the mental well-being, having to travel to these different areas just to have different tests done. So that is my only concern about the hub, is private individuals coming in and saying, yes, we can do such and such and such, and then you find that it have implications on patients using the services, that it's a private thing, and some of them really do sneak in their little bits and pieces. So that was my only concern, but it has worked for myself. I know for neighbours, I know for people I talk about, residents in our community do said, yes, now we can get our blood tests done and don't having to wait around. So that works well. Thank you.
Just to respond to that, and thank you for your kind words on that service. Long may that last, Councillor Nelson, but thank you for what you've said. I mean, just to be clear what I was saying about the hub, absolutely committed to the principle of NHS general practice running these services within the NHS. The term of the hub I meant was simply one of the general practices in that locality being the hub to the other general practices as spokes in the service. Certainly not considering a private provider, but basing it within a general practice. I don't know if Ritu wants to add anything from the GP Confederation point of view.
So just to answer that question, the hubs are GP-led hubs, and currently we do have these hubs as well attached to our extended access hubs. So if there is an overflow or there's lack of capacity in a certain practice because of workforce issues, we have the capacity to do the bloods at these joint hubs, which run every evening and on Saturdays and Sundays. So we put in additional capacity in that form, because with general practice, the practices of different sizes, they may have workforce which may not be adequate for, and there may be sickness, and also just as a backup, we've got these hubs already working across the patch, and these hubs are based in the north, one in Uxbridge area and the other in the south area. So it's so that it's accessible to the patients close to where they are, and it's the same GP service, so the same people are working there. So we wouldn't want to ever privatize it if we had a choice, and we would continue to deliver the service to our patients.
Great, thank you. Philip.
A quick one from me. I'm another satisfied customer. My point really is I was intrigued looking at the 2021 papers. I wasn't on the committee in those days, and I noted with some interest that actually Hillingdon were unusual. in operating the service in hospitals. Elsewhere in North West London, it's different. So presumably, within the ICB area, there are learnings that can be applied to perhaps help address some of the issues raised in point 4. So I suppose it's more an observation than a question. You may care to comment.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Hillingdon was unusual. Hillingdon is always unique, but Hillingdon was unusual in providing a largely hospital-based service. I think what is interesting when we were talking to the other boroughs within North West London and to other practices is that in a way each area does run it slightly differently from each other, and Hillingdon, for instance, has got a very strong GP confederation. We're lucky to have that. Some boroughs don't have that association between practices. So I think there absolutely are opportunities to learn from the other practices, and North West London, the ICB is encouraging us to share learning and to learn from each other. But what's interesting is that somehow there are always unique problems that haven't been experienced elsewhere.
Great stuff. Okay, well, thank you, Richard. Always a pleasure to talk phlebotomy with you. We look forward to the next time you come to update us, but it is great that things do seem to be moving, and I do like the idea of taking that success and thinking about where else we can do that, because GPs and pharmacies as well, but GPs are convenient for people to use. So thank you for that. Right, so we move on to item 7, which is Hillingdon Health and Care Partners update, and we have Keith Spencer here, who's attended our meetings before, but this is the first time you've led on an item, I think, isn't it? So welcome. For those on the committee, you are the new Caroline, so that we all know who that is. So and also Dr. Ritu Prasad, who's co-chair of the Hillingdon GP Confederation. So obviously, take it away.
And somehow I knew I'd be introduced as the new Caroline. I somehow knew you could listen. So, good evening, councillors, and thank you for the invite. And this has been a double act this evening between myself and Ritu. So what I'm going to do is just briefly outline Hillingdon Health and Care Partners, what we do, who we are, how we're held accountable, so on and so forth, and then ask Ritu specifically to talk about GP access issues. So I'll try and keep this brisk. And I hope, colleagues, you have got copies of the slides in front of you. It won't be half as fun in black and white, but let's give it a go. So slide 2, if you like, which is headed "Who We Are." First of all, Hillingdon Health and Care Partners is not an organisation. I think that's the first thing to get clear. We are a place-based partnership of health and care organisations in Hillingdon, and our members, if you like, the constituent bodies of that partnership are the Hillingdon Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, Central and North West London NHS Foundation Trust, the Confederation Hillingdon, and H for All, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Hillingdon for All. They are the collaborative, they're the organisations working together, and we work with the London Borough of Hillingdon and the North West London ICS to do the things on the right-hand side of that slide. To be honest with you, if I could just, I could read those 3 bullet points through, but actually I'd just like to reflect back on the previous agenda, but one, when we talked about the CAMHS bit, and just pick some quotes from things that you all said around the table. Why I'm here, and why Ritu's here, and why I'm the Managing Director of Hillingdon Health and Care Partners is to try and fix the things that you've alluded to. And I've just picked 2 quotes as all the parts working together effectively. Yeah. And then secondly, Councillor, the point that you made, on occasion the system is not working for the people that we serve. And the reason why you need we have posts like me is simply because organisations create silos, and what we need to do is work together collectively to join up care around the people that we serve. And we've still got a journey, as you've learned this evening, we've still got a journey to travel on that. So I just thought that was more real than some bluntly some management speak that I put on a set of slides a number of days ago. But fundamentally, what we're here to do is improve population health and to join up care. So the way we work, just as an outside, HCP has 2.8 employees, myself, a PA and a finance lead. We work through the 4 organisations, so we don't take on lots of extra people. We work through the organisations who are our constituent parts, and we work to join things together around the patient. If I move on to slide 3, which is, we've refreshed our plans and ways of working. What we've got, actually I think we're relatively unique in North West London. We have a joint health and wellbeing strategy. It has 6 priorities, which we've all signed up to. They're set out on that slide there, and we've been talking about priority 1 for most of this evening. But we've got 5 other priorities as well that we're trying to work through. I can spend the rest of the evening talking about governance if you like. Good. But the governance structure for HSB is on the right-hand side of that slide. That sets out how I'm held to account, but more importantly, how each of the partners hold each other to account, because that's really where we are, and we're ultimately accountable through to the Health and Wellbeing Board, which, as you may know, I jointly chair with Councillor Palmer. I'm going to turn the page. It's with trepidation I put this slide, I have to say, into the pack. If I was to draw for you how services are currently organised in Hillingdon, I'd probably need more than 1 sheet of paper. In fact, to be fair, if I went to any borough in the country, I'd probably need multiple pages there. So what I've set out here is our target delivery model, our aspiration as a partnership, health and social care, how we want health and care to look going forward. And I'd like to segue this to the conversation we had at the previous meeting with the hospital. So there are 3 big moving parts in this model. On the right-hand side, we always talk about the hospital. We want to build a new one, but you will not get a new one in Hillingdon unless we change how we deliver the left-hand side of the model, which is around our neighbourhoods and around our borough-based services. Because obviously what we're wanting to do is to see more people closer to their home. So the 3 big moving parts of our model going forward, and I'm going to start on the left-hand side with our 6 integrated neighbourhoods. We are passionate about developing neighbourhood working, about taking care closer to where people live, and at the heart of those 6 integrated neighbourhoods are 3 functions. One is about population health. So how do we make sure that we're delivering outcomes for our local population? And each of our 6 neighbourhoods, which are made up of wards, Hillingdon wards put together, anchored through general practice, have different needs. And it needs a local solution for those different needs. So proactive and anticipatory care for neighbourhoods. So how do we get upstream? The 3 biggest challenges facing us from our JSNA are hypertension, our anxiety and depression, and obesity. To start to tackle those, we need to get involved much earlier in prevention work. We've become a illness and a sickness service, and we need actually to move from that. And you've heard that in the CAMHS discussion. The same applies to physical health as well. And then the final thing, which you, I'm sure, could talk for hours and days around, is the concept of same-day urgent primary care. Is how can you get an appointment with your GP on the day? Because what the evidence suggests, if you can't do that, you will go to ED. You will go to ED. So how do we tackle some of those problems with some local solutions? And what we're proposing, as you will see, is to bring together some quite disparate, currently some quite disparate teams, and to join them up more around those neighbourhoods. So community health, community nursing, therapies, care connection teams, care home support, community social care. The third sector on our community assets, general practice, community mental health, is bring those together in a more joined up way. Because what patients tell me is we've created a referral industry. We have created a referral industry where patients get bounced from one service to another, and that's not right. So we need to sort that by actually having simpler, making a complex system simpler. We've got care navigators now. You only need a navigator if a system's so complex that people can't understand how to get there. So it's about simplifying how we access care, and the neighbourhoods are the biggest building block of what we're wanting to do. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, facing us, is how we create those integrated neighbourhoods anchored through primary care, which start to develop a population health approach. So that's the first big component. Then the second big component are the borough-based services, and the way we define those is that if a person suffers a rapid deterioration in their health, how do they get a same-day response? We organise borough services in that way. If a person is stuck in a hospital bed, how do we organise and integrate services in a better way so that they can get out quickly? So if I give you some data, there are 5,000 people in Hillingdon who utilise 70% of health and care resource. Yeah. Those 5,000 people are people who have got complex needs and more than 2 long-term conditions. And they use 70% of health and adult social care. So that's a small number of people who we need to manage in a different way and support in a different way. Otherwise, that usage, as we get older, is going to get bigger. So that's a key component driving this model, and that's the model that we're trying to work to in transforming and changing what we do. And it's this model that will keep people out of hospital and will allow us to build a new hospital on the TH8 site. So that's of where we're working towards. What I put on slide 5 are some success stories. So we've started to build that model, and the things that we've put in place have begun to work. So I've talked about the care home support team, our care connection teams, and our high intensity user services. These were the first things. I'm sure Councillor Cawthorne will remember these services indeed. Our care home support team, the impact of that is a 3% year-on-year reduction in ambulance conveyances, attendances, and admissions to hospital. 10% of our admissions to hospital, emergency admissions, are usually from care homes. Our care connections teams have delivered an 8% reduction in A&E attendances and admissions to hospital for those supported by the CCTs. And our high intensity user service has got staggering numbers. These are people who turn up frequently, very frequently, 30, 40 times to ED. Massive impact in 40% reduction in those services. So that's some selected points. And Councillor, if I may turn you over to page 6. Again, I was asked how are we held to account, how are we measured, how do we work? We are measured in many ways. What I've chosen to put here, and this looks much better in colour, I can assure you, than in the black and white that you've got. This compares us against a suite of 13 metrics against the other North West London boroughs. It looks actually quite good on my copy. Hillingdon does rather well compared to the other boroughs. Not complacent. There are some reds on that chart there, but actually we do rather well on that. In particular, our admission rates for over 65s are ranked amongst the best in North West London, and our rates of diverting care home attendances again ranks amongst the best in North West London. So we are compared and held to account across a range of metrics. But Hillingdon as a borough, we do well compared to the other North West London boroughs. My final slide, I guess, is just to say what are our priorities going forward. Well, 3 ones, and I would just pick things that I know we have a joint interest. Kelly and I talk about these frequently. Is around embedding population health management, embedding that in our neighbourhoods, really getting upstream with people who otherwise will become poorly later in life. Establishing new ways of working that support integrated person-centred care. And then there are 3, I don't believe in boiling the ocean. I think there is a risk that we take on too many priorities and we don't deliver them very well. So we've chosen to focus on 3 priorities in the next 3 to 6 months. One is around integrated neighbourhood development. The second is around reactive care. And the third is end-of-life care. And we want to develop and implement new models of care for those 3 and make a real difference because they move the big numbers. They move the big numbers in terms of care. So what I'll do there, if I may, Chair, is ask Dr. Prasad to talk about hot topic at the moment, which is GP access and increasing demand. So do you want to...
That's okay. So, as Keith has just mentioned, what our proposals are, and this actually segues very well into GP access because the demand on GP appointments has increased, and it's a staggering amount.
I've put in some national data, and I've also put in some data that Hillingdon, local data as well. So if you compare appointments that were in the year of 2019 to now 2022, almost 35 million appointments have been increased in general practice itself, and this is causing a lot of pressure in general practice. And with general practice, you have to deal with the day-to-day sort of changes. It may be streptococcal infection at one point, it may be something else that comes up, or it may be a demand of new vaccinations or repeated vaccinations. So general practice is trying to cope with all of that work as well. In addition to what we really need to be doing is to look after people with long-term conditions, people who need the same continuity of care. And unless we address this, we are not going to get anywhere. And that's why Keith's model of trying to segregate same-day urgent care, because same-day urgent care from a clinician point of view is different, but from a patient's perspective, it is very different. For them, something that has happened acutely to them needs to be addressed there and then, and that's what increases the demand in general practice. So general practice has been trying to cope in a number of ways, and during the pandemic, a lot of digitalization happened, and it happened overnight, and general practice had to change with virtual consultations being pushed into general practice, which people were, some surgeries were used to it, but majority weren't. And we had to change the way we interacted with patients. Patients cooperated really well as well, and during COVID times, nobody wanted to come near a medical center, and they wanted to be treated at home, which was perfectly appropriate. And at that time, we had to do a lot of hand-holding of patients who were waiting for treatments in hospitals as well. So you had to handhold them and keep them supported in general practice. But having come out of the pandemic, now everything is opened up, so more face-to-face appointments are being offered, and majority of practices are giving people a choice. So people have got used to the digital option, so some prefer that, which is their choice, and it may be perfectly appropriate to have the combination of both. But by and large, most surgeries are offering face-to-face appointments. So I'm not going to go into the figures because the figures are all there, but I'll just give you a bit of context. So patients are given a choice, and if they prefer a telephone appointment, fine, and that's slotted in. It also gives a break, and it also helps us deal with increased appointments that we are offering in general practice as well. The other way that general practice is coping with this increased demand is by using digital options like messaging services. So rather than seeing people or calling people back in for follow-ups for their results of things, we are communicating with the digital options where it's appropriate. It's not appropriate for everyone. It's not appropriate for a lot of elderly population who do not like it. Some are very savvy and they want to be contacted that way, but some don't. But at least it gives us a large proportion of people we can use that technology with. So that's what general practice has been doing. I mean, there's a lot of data which National Digital Database kind of correlated, and that's through change in the way that we have put appointments within general practice. So they're able to extract that data digitally to see how many telephone appointments, how many sort of virtual video consultation, or how many face-to-face consultations have we offered, and which clinician has offered that. So all this data is showing them, I mean, numbers have increased dramatically. There's a lot of same-day appointments, and almost 48.1% of appointments in December 22 took place on the same day. And that's what we are trying to move to a different platform so that GPs can then work with people who really need the GP appointments for. And 91% of all the appointments were attended. So our DNA rates in general practice is low, and I hope it stays low because it's a wasted appointment. You could be doing a lot. But this has kind of shown that people are wanting to go back to the general practice and get themselves seen. And some of the phlebotomy data, yes, it's picking up because all the people with chronic medical conditions we do need monitoring are able to access that, and so that we need the monitoring to be able to look after their conditions as well. So, so basically, the workload that they extracted is only of appointments. What they don't understand in general practice is you're dealing with a lot more than just seeing patients, because when you see patients, it generates a lot of work. It may be blood test results, it will be prescriptions, it may be dealing with hospital letters where consultants have given us instructions that you need to follow this person up. In 2 weeks they need blood, so you monitor their blood pressure or various things. And that demand is not, you can't kind of put it down in an appointment system which a digital database can extract. So it's the digital day, I mean, that is just the increase in appointments. So you can imagine the pressure within general practice when you're dealing with all of that. And plus there's a lot of supporting of patients because they've been waiting for treatment. And we know that this is going to be an ongoing challenge for hospitals to be able to deliver that elective option, because a lot of people have waited a long time and they get anxious and they're coming backwards and forwards. So we're trying to kind of work in a way that we can address the patient's needs but also deal with our chronic disease management as well. So if you look at the Hillingdon data, so the virtual appointments, if you look in 2021, they were about 45% and face-to-face were about 55%. It's increased to 61% face-to-face. And if you were to take the most recent data, I think it's around about 70% are face-to-face, because 20 to 30% patients still want the virtual option, which is perfectly fine. So there are more face-to-face appointments, but there are also more virtual appointments, because with the opening up of digital access, it has opened different channels of how people get to a GP. So people used to walk in, they used to telephone for appointments. Now they have the digital access, so they can be sending us consultations online, and they may be able to book. So that's the increase in demand that we are trying to cope with. And basically, I mean, this the last slide, I've given some advantage of the virtual consultation because it helps us as GPs cope with the increased demand. But moving forward, I think the way forward would be the options that Keith has just outlined. So we need to work together to deal with the same-day demand, because with a new hospital built, there's going to be less capacity there, and we need to keep people out of hospital. And if you were to talk to any patient, they'd rather be seen close to home in the community rather than go up to hospital and wait for hours and hours. Because a lot of patients, when we are talking, even though they do need emergency appointments at an ED, are very reluctant to go there because of the waiting times. And plus having the need to keep telling their story multiple times till they're actually seen by the person who can deal with their problems. So hopefully with the model that we're proposing in Hillingdon, we'll be able to deal with a lot of these challenges. So I'll stop there for questions, and I won't go into all the figures there.
Well, thank you both. Firstly, Keith, it's really interesting to hear what the HHCP is about, and I think everyone in this committee is completely convinced that we need somebody doing what you're doing. That's obviously part of the issues we're discussing CAMHS, but it's all over the place in terms of those joined up working. And I can highly recommend watching Health and Wellbeing Board meetings that happened here. There's 4 a year, and they're on YouTube, and you know, in terms of seeing how this works in practice is very good. And Ruti, thanks for your stats, because obviously you see in the news about GP appointments, this and that, but actually when you look at the increases, I mean, that is something that needs working, isn't it? So it's useful to know. So I haven't got any questions particularly, but Sheree, go on.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the COVID's impacts was the practices started giving virtual appointments. So are you aware what is the proportion of virtual appointments and face-to-face by the practices? Is there any data available?
So I've put in the data. This is an average, obviously, and it will vary from practice to practice. Plus, it will also vary whether it's which area the practice is based as well. It will depend on what the patients really need. So it's up in the data since last year, it was about 61% are face-to-face and the rest are virtual. But if you were to look at data now, it's almost Hillingdon is at around near about 70% face-to-face appointments, and the rest are virtual appointments. Does that?
So what is the plan? Would you continue giving virtual appointments plus face-to-face, and what will be the ratio?
So the plan will be to continue, but the ratio may vary because we're giving patients options of which type it will prefer. Sometimes the options may not be right for the clinical reasons, especially with children and all. Most practices will rather see a child who's under 5 face-to-face, because it's sometimes very difficult to assess a child on a video consultation. But for older people who are working, it's a very convenient way of doing it, and you can do it in a time that suits the person as well. It could be their lunch break or wherever, and you can hold a telephone consultation and a video consultation. So my gut feeling is it'll stay at 20-30% virtual, and the rest will all be face-to-face.
Rita.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Prasad, just a quick observe. Are you going to simplify the process of booking appointments? Because from a personal experience, I've not had to book an appointment. Luckily, well, I've chosen not to book an appointment for several years. But from recent experience, I had to, and the frustration I had when I called the GP was, you need to call at a certain time, and I can't tell you anything until you call at that time for an appointment in 2 weeks' time. For which I thought, well, it's not urgent for me, but my symptoms could disappear. So for somebody else, that would be a different situation. And this was a week ago, and in that week, I've just not had the time to call back because I've given up. So is there going to be a simpler way of people that haven't got time to go online and book an appointment at 7:30 or 8:30 and probably phone while on your way to work? Is there a proposal to change that?
I mean, some of the things are already in place. So we used to have e-consult, and now we got patches. So you could send in that document, and you will get an appointment, because once patches is seen, then you get an appointment. So those are meant for non-urgent appointments. So within the next, most GP surgeries will do it within 24 to 48 hours. You will be seen or be offered an appointment. So that's one way of doing it. In Hillingdon, the other thing that we've done is changed our telephone systems. So all of Hillingdon has gone to one telephone system, which is GP Connect, and that will help us if we were to do it at a hub model, like get patients to be able to get in contact with somebody who can take their call. We're trying to see whether that's going to work. So that's work in progress, and we will see whether it can work at a PCN or neighborhood level, and that's where the same-day urgent care comes. So you will have a place where you can leave a message, you'll get a call back, just to make it easier. Because if you think in general practice, I'm sitting in my surgery, morning calls, it's just incessant till 11 o'clock. And sometimes patients do want to talk and you can't stop them, but you've got a queue building up. And there's only so many receptionists you can put in each surgery to take these calls. So that's the reason why patients wait for ages and ages. And it's not right, I'm not saying it's right, but that's the reality. So we're looking at ways of doing that. So the process has been started by everybody going onto the same digital cloud-based telephone system, so that if we had to do it at a hub model and get calls in and have a call center sort of approach, then that will be a possibility in the future.
If I could just add to that, is what's really important is, I refer to the 5,000 patients, what's really important is people with complex needs and multiple long-term conditions, they need the continuity of care of their general practitioner. And what's happening is that actually people who are fundamentally healthy, but maybe just have what we call an episodic care, it could be, we used to call them the worry well, who've got a cold they'll be ringing up as well. And what will happen is, it's the people who need that continuity of care don't get it. So what we're trying to do is to simplify access, so that yes, if you're unwell but you're fundamentally okay, you can get seen quickly, but we do that in a different way to enable people who've got complex needs to see their named GP, because that continuity of care is really important for them. To see the same person is really important. Otherwise, you are telling your story multiple times to different people. And that's the concept that we're trying. And that's how general practice originally started. So in some ways, we're going back to the roots of general practice as it was at the start.
I think it's quite. So, what sort of timescales will we be looking at? Because it sounds really interesting and it's practical, and probably the best way forward. But, timescales.
We're trying our level best to get it going. So Keith and I are pushing it. And the borough team is supporting us in it, and hopefully we will get at least the same day urgent care model within the next couple of months, I would say. So definitely.
We don't brutally. We don't spend ages writing papers. So what we want to do is the hub model that we talked about, is get one hub up and running in the next few months as a proof of concept. Because we think it's important and we think it will work. And actually, we're actually working with the London Borough of Hillingdon to look at where we might place that. That's what's the best place to put that. So that it's a watch this space one.
Well, that'll be good, Chair. If it does come up, in the next few months, and then you could come back and let us know.
Tony.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, great. I like the ideas, etc. I've got a question for one each. The accident and emergency, it's a big problem. I mean, I had people complain to me last year about queuing in the street, well, not in the street, but queuing out the door. And it's good that we're looking at areas of tackling the reduction in people using it. But I mean, one of the main problems is people go to accident and emergency because they can't get an appointment at the GPs, or they haven't got a GP. There's a lot of new people in the borough that can't get a GP or haven't got a GP, and it's a systematic problem. I mean, if I was Einstein, I might be able to solve it or something like that. But I'm glad to see that you are taking issues to try and reduce the numbers using A&E. I'm really encouraged. And a question for Dr. Persad, just about the recruitment of GPs. How are we doing in the borough? Are we up to speed of the number of GPs?
So that is a challenge, but Hillingdon is one of the high-risk areas, and it has been identified. So there is more sort of posts for GP trainees in Hillingdon. So it will take time, but that's the plan, so that we have more trained GPs, people training in Hillingdon, so that they stay in Hillingdon. And there's a lot of things that we have put in to retain these GPs in. So on a long-term basis, we are obviously there's a lot of support for older GPs, so as to support them during these kind of challenging times and avoiding them getting burnt out and retire. So there's programs for them to support these people as well, and also for the new trainees, and we're trying our best to retain them. Now, the other way of looking at workforce is by not just relying on GPs, but having additional roles, and that's what we were alluding to even with the mental health roles. So these are additional roles like pharmacists, we've got physiotherapists, we've got dietitians, podiatrists, occupational therapists, paramedics, PAs, all working within primary care in the networks. And that has opened up a lot of capacity, especially the social prescribers and the health and well-being coaches, because they do take up a lot of our work, and they offer appointments which people are very happy with, because it's the right type of person who's addressing the appropriate needs. So that is one way of addressing the workforce, because training up doctors takes time and there's no magic cure. But I think if we are able to support all the GPs to stay in post while we train up all these new GPs, that is the solution that we are trying to address.
Just to pick up on your ED issue, so the reason why we're focusing on same-day urgent care is for that very reason. Around 30% of people who attend the ED department say, and actually perception is reality, they're there because they feel they can't get an appointment with the GP. The appointment systems are too complex for them to understand, but actually, because they feel even if they have to wait for 12 hours on a foam mattress, actually they'll get seen that day. They'll get the X-ray done. They'll get everything done, which is why the hub issue is important. Just the community diagnostics is important, because unless you give alternatives, people are still going to go. They've learned a behaviour like they go to ED. They'll wait for 12 hours, but eventually we'll get seen, and we need to unpick that a little bit by offering people alternatives.
June.
Thank you, Chairman. My concern is we got a lot of GPs retiring, and I hear you saying that you're trying to keep the older GPs on. But we got a few surgeries that close within the south side of the borough, and there are certain areas within the borough that doesn't have any GP at all, and those residents, Heathrow Villages, Hammondsworth, Sipson, Longford, they have no GP services, so they have to travel out either to West Drayton or into Haystown, actually to seek a GP services. So accessing those services is really difficult for them. Can you let us know when will they have some kind of GP services to cover those areas that really have no provision whatsoever?
So obviously, creating a new GP surgery is not within our remit of general practice, but it would be a commissioning issue. But the way to address it is by having these hubs in a location that covers that area, and it's a little bit closer to these areas that you just mentioned, because this has been a long-term challenge in Hillingdon, especially the Heathrow Villages, because we've heard from residents and we've heard some very sort of moving stories about elderly people not being able to access healthcare and having to travel miles to get to a GP. So that is one way of addressing it, unless another GP surgery is commissioned to cover that area, and that's what we develop. So one of the ways of addressing the retiring GPs, we've got a map of, and also like a trajectory of people who are nearing retirement, is to support them and also see whether there's any plans that need to be put in, rather than somebody saying, okay, I'm going in the next 6 months and disperse my patients. So we don't want that to happen. We want something to be put in place well ahead, and that's where our GP Confederation working very closely with all the PCNs to see that doesn't happen, because we've seen one closure and the effect that it has on patient care during that duration till they get dispersed. So we need to plan ahead, and that's what we are all doing at the moment.
Just to say, Councillor, I met with some of the residents of Harmondsworth and Simpson yesterday, where they expressed quite vociferously their dissatisfaction with the services that they've got there. And what we've committed to doing is to work with them as part of the neighbourhood working to look at what can be done. Because what was told to me, for example, is they can't even get prescriptions delivered to the village. Now, that's frankly not acceptable. That's not something that we would accept in any other area, and there has to be solutions to that. But we need to take a local community focus, which is why the neighbourhoods are important. So we've agreed to meet with the residents again and to look at what can be done as part of that neighbourhood and working. But there are villages there where actually we need to do things differently, fundamentally. We'd agree with you.
I said it's been out of the system for a long time, and this is something that's ongoing, and it really is not acceptable that certain part of this borough is not getting the GP services that is required.
Richard, did you want to come in on this?
Just to build on what Keith was saying, and to pick up on Councillor Cawthorne's point about working with other boroughs across North West London, this is a discussion that we're having with Hounslow as well, because there are practices near the border that we could be collaborating with. It also picks up the point of actually some of the advantages of virtual consultations, digital consultations, if there is an issue. And I think there's also a real opportunity for enhancing the pharmacy service locally, and maybe looking at more advanced services that can be provided at the pharmacy, not only to pick up the prescription point, but also offering part-time GPs or whatever at the local pharmacy. But it certainly is an issue that let's carry on looking at.
It would be good to hear about some improvements in terms of the services available in Heathrow villages, because it's a long-term issue. But we'll look forward. Those are some interesting ideas, so we look forward to hearing about how those work. Philip.
Okay, I'm tempted to ask Keith a question, but in view of the hour, I won't. I'll content myself with an observation. And Keith, you, I think it was about 4 years ago, you shared with me your vision in terms of the level of opportunity that's out there to address the fact that a small proportion of our population takes such a significant proportion of resource and puts a considerable strain on the health economy. You conveyed that very eloquently 4 years ago in a way that I've never forgotten, and certainly that's 5,000 in Hillingdon, 70% of resource is really quite an eye-watering figure. I don't know how you see that perhaps changing over the years ahead, but I'm pleased to see the initial successes. You may or may not want to comment, but I'm encouraged by what I can see. I do have a question for Dr. Prasad, though, if I may, and that's really around pharmacists. You did touch on pharmacists earlier. For a long time, we've talked about the scope there is perhaps for our pharmacists to play a part in relieving some of those pressures. I wonder how that's coming on. Are you able to say something about how that's progressing?
So pharmacists are delivering a lot more services. What's new is the CPCS service. So this is a service whereby GP surgeries can refer directly to your community pharmacy for simple things that could be minor ailments that the pharmacy has agreed to do. So we've developed like referral forms that can go directly from our systems as a referral to a pharmacy. The pharmacy will obviously give the patient an appointment and see them. So this is work that is happening, and it's been going on for, I think, the last year we started this work. It's still it's not perfect, because patients obviously need something, and prescriptions are an issue, because patients most of the times do not want to pay for an over-the-counter medication, and hence they end up coming back to the surgery. So unless we're trying to develop a safe system, so that if we were to refer, because at the end of the day we are responsible because we have signposted that patient to the pharmacy, we need to be sure that that person is looked after and cared and has been dealt with in a safe manner. So this is work, and we are working. We've brought that back again in every PCN. So we've got lead pharmacists who are attached to each of the neighborhoods of the PCNs, and that's the piece of work that's going on. So there is more integration. They're also taking part in things like hypertension monitoring, ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, 24-hour blood pressure. So they're offering a lot more services in addition to medication reviews, which they do send back to the practice. What is lacking at the moment and is not perfect is the integration of the IT system, which is quite fiddly. And once that happens and is more sort of streamlined, it will be a much better service.
Great. Well, thank you so much for staying with us until this hour and giving us a good last substantive item. And you're all free to leave if you wish now. So thank you so much. Always good to hear from you. Right. And the reason I say last substantive item, because item 8, which is about the review into children's dental services that we did in 2021-22, is going to be moved to the next meeting, is it?
Okay.
Or do you want to do it?
No, yes, you can do it.
If you want to do it, sorry, I was told. Sorry, I was told it was going to be moved, but you are welcome to do it if you wish to. We are here, so we might as well stay here.
So, in part, Chair. So, there are 9 recommendations from the report, some of which it is fair to say have been superseded by time and some government policy. All of the recommendations that that refer to escalating the issue to sort of central government level have actually been done, but I would say that the main players to which those letters have been sent have been superseded probably twice since that time. So there is something about revisiting some of these recommendations in light of current government, in light of some of the changes, particularly around fluoridation, because the Health and Social Care Bill came out last March, which kind of moved the responsibility for fluoridation of water to the Secretary of State. That was enacted, I think, from 1st of November last year. I would say that there is no changes to fluoridation system. That is a hot potato, politically, socially, and sort of certainly the experiences I've had in trying to get fluoride in water means that it's not a case of Hillingdon could go separately from the rest of London. It is a case of it needs the full water supply, or the full whoever receives the water supply from the company will all have to have it. So getting that consensus is actually very difficult, despite the fact that the decision of whether fluoride in water is varied, started or stopped solely rests with the Secretary of State for Health. I think it's for Health, that one.
I have to admit, I forget who that is now. There's been so many since we wrote to him. But
yes, I think there's been a few since we wrote to him. On the other hand, some of the recommendations I would advise are probably really sort of healthy and wise, in as much as a real focus on early years provision, supervised toothbrushing, Better Smiles campaign, so that sort of promotion of parents supporting their children, early year, sort of taking place in early years setting and in education. That is all. That's all positive. What I would say though is that some of the recommendations are quite long term, and so in terms of that kind of COVID issue of the way that we monitor impact is by doing what we call dental epidemiology. So we take a sample, a very small sample, it's only about 250 children, and we model what we see in terms of decayed, missing and filled teeth on those 250 children. That's done every other year, and obviously the kind of risk implications of anyone looking into a child's mouth over COVID has really disrupted the time scale of that epidemiology. So that work needs to be done. There are some policy issues in terms of for you as elected leaders. I think that things like the fizzy drinks levy, the sugar levy, and how we sort of support some of our decisions about sort of borough-based catering, where we have control over them, are areas that as a council we want to consider in terms of our appetite to really promote change. So those are the kind of things in terms of they are big ticket issues, but actually there are some different viewpoints as to whether a local council should be making decision in what could be seen as a kind of a quite parenting position, in a kind of a similar way as some of our other policies about sort of fast food locations. So on the back of that, these are essentially headlines from the report that was previously done. As I said from the top, I think some of it's been superseded by better approaches and what we could be thinking as better recommendations. In addition to that, I think that our local strategy has not been sufficiently ambitious, and our investment in terms of health and local authority has been limited based on a lack of ambitious strategy. We haven't got the worst oral health in London, but we're pretty close to it. North West London as a region is pretty poor. So actually, in terms of this, what I would say is, and ask is, we bring this back with a more ambitious approach. It gets viewed by the Health and Wellbeing Board, because certainly in the time that I've been in Hillingdon, it hasn't been taken responsibility as part of the Health and Wellbeing Board. But actually it is promoted in terms of its priority because of that sort of the whole issue of it. We're not just talking about oral health and the implications of children experiencing pain. We're not just talking about the massive numbers of children and young people who access sort of NHS acute services to have teeth removed under general anaesthetic, but actually that kind of whole concept of oral health and good dentist or good dental health is a kind of a lifelong issue in terms of self-esteem, mental health, and actually sets people up for that sort of huge lifelong opportunities on the back of that kind of self-esteem it brings. So that's my ask. We'll bring it back with a lot more ambition, setting some clear success outcomes about what we want to achieve, with a clear direction of how much we're investing, whether that return is adequate in terms of the investment will lead to significant change, because the return of investment is very easy. It's roughly about £35 to every £1 invested. So it's a huge return over the course of a life. So really, really important that we get this right and do it at pace and scale.
Great. No, definitely coming back to us with a more ambitious plan on this, because I mean, when we did the report, we realised there are some big structural issues which, if they were resolved, they could make massive differences. But this is why we wrote to central government about some of them. But obviously, since we've written to central government, I'm not saying our letter caused this, but I wouldn't say central government's got better at resolving big structural issues since then, because there's been a lot of chaos. But yeah, no. I mean, it's a problem that needs dealing with. Yeah, we'd appreciate you coming back with a more ambitious. Once you've had a chance to have a more ambitious look at this. So yeah.
Councillor, it coincides very well with what Keith didn't say, is that the whole of the children's HHCP transformation programme is being looked at in March in terms of are we being ambitious overall in terms of what we want the big ticket issues for children to be in the future. So it kind of fits quite nicely in terms of timing.
Great, because teeth and obesity are very closely linked, which is another issue. Yeah. Okay, should we move on? Yeah. Thank you so much for sitting and listening to the rest of the meeting. Right, so are we on to the Cabinet Forward Plan now? Fantastic. Any views on the Cabinet Forward Plan? Going once, going twice. Excellent. Our work programme. Do we need any more work? I don't think we do need any more work, do we? We've got lots of work. Okay, I think the work programme is pretty good as it is. Yep. We're all happy with that? Yep. Okay, I'll call this meeting to a close. Thank you.